At the airport, my brother slapped me across the face in front of hundreds of passengers just hours before our family trip to Hawaii. My mother immediately blamed me for causing a scene, rushing to comfort him because he was, and always had been, the golden child. What they failed to realize was that my credit card funded this entire luxury vacation. I did not scream. I did not cry. I picked up my bag, walked through first-class security, and quietly canceled their non-refundable tickets. What happened over the next few days dismantled their lives piece by piece. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic relatives who mistook your generosity for weakness. The Los Angeles International Airport hummed with the usual morning chaos. I stood near the premier check-in desk, watching my family approach. I am 32 years old, a senior corporate auditor specializing in forensic financial investigations. My profession requires me to identify liabilities and neutralize them. Today, my biggest liability was standing right in front of me. I had paid for this Hawaiian getaway to celebrate the anniversary of my parents, Susan and David. I carried a single weekender bag. My brother Tyler, however, required a different standard. He marched toward their counter wearing a tailored suit he could not afford, playing the role of a successful tech entrepreneur. Trailing behind him was his wife, Jasmine, a sharp African-American woman who ran a rising lifestyle brand, constantly checking her phone to manage her digital presence. Between Tyler, Jasmine, and my parents, they dragged 6 oversized, hard-shell suitcases. The visual contrast was stark. They carried the heavy weight of their inflated egos. While I traveled light, the airline agent weighed the final bag and typed on her keyboard. She looked up, maintaining a practiced customer service smile. "Sir, your party is over the baggage allowance. The excess weight fee comes to $1,200. Tyler did not blink. He turned to me and snapped his fingers, pointing at the card reader. "Tap your card. Vanessa, we are going to miss our lounge time." I looked at the terminal screen, then at the 6 bloated suitcases. Tyler had not worked a legitimate job in 3 years. He relied on my parents to fund his imaginary startups. I was done funding his delusions. "No," I said. My voice was low, carrying no emotion. "I paid for the flights and the villa. Your luggage is your responsibility." Tyler narrowed his eyes. The facade of the wealthy businessman cracked. "Do not embarrass me in front of these people. Pay the fee?" I shook my head. "Use your own corporate card." "Tyler." Unless it bounced again. The slap echoed through the terminal. It was a sharp, stinging strike against my left cheek. The ambient noise of the airport ceased. Passengers turned their heads. The ticket agent froze, her hand hovering over her keyboard. My skin burned, but I kept my posture rigid. Susan stepped forward. She did not ask if I was hurt. She grabbed Tyler by the arm, shielding him, and glared at me. "Why do you always have to push his buttons? Vanessa, you just had to humiliate him in public. Did you not?" David stood in silence, looking at the floor. Jasmine stared at me, her eyes wide, realizing the boundary her husband had just crossed. I did not raise my hand to my cheek. I did not shed a tear. An auditor does not mourn a bad investment. She liquidates it. I adjusted the collar of my silk blouse. I reached down, picked up my leather handbag, and turned my back on them. I handed my boarding pass to the security agent at the first-class priority lane and walked through the gates without looking back. 10 minutes later, I sat in the quiet seclusion of the private departure lounge. I ordered a glass of chilled champagne. From my briefcase, I pulled a manila folder labeled Asset Protection and Trust Compliance. I reviewed the documents inside, ensuring every legal lock was in place for the storm I was about to unleash. Then, I opened my airline application. I navigated to the itinerary, listing all 5 passengers. I selected my name and unlinked it from the group. I tapped the reservation containing Tyler, Jasmine, Susan, and David. I hit the cancel button. The screen refreshed, confirming their tickets were voided. I took a slow sip of champagne, waiting for the inevitable fallout at the boarding gate. 30,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean, the air was remarkably still. I sat in a secluded first-class pod, the noise-canceling headphones blocking out the faint hum of the jet engines. A flight attendant silently placed a crystal flute of vintage champagne on my tray table. I took a slow sip, letting the crisp liquid cool my throat. My left cheek still carried a faint, dull ache from the physical strike, but my mind was entirely detached from the sting. As a senior forensic auditor, I do not process betrayal through the lens of grief. I process it as a compromised asset. When a ledger shows systemic fraud, you do not negotiate with the parasite. You sever the connection, freeze the capital, and watch the entire corrupt structure collapse under its own weight. I knew precisely what was unfolding on the ground at the Los Angeles departure terminal. Tyler operates on a baseline of unearned confidence and staggering entitlement. He likely assumed my silent departure through the security gates was nothing more than a temporary temper tantrum. I could perfectly picture him guiding our parents and his wife toward a premium airport restaurant, ordering overpriced avocado toast and artisan espresso, charging the exorbitant bill to whichever credit line had not yet reached its limit. They would have taken their time, strolling past duty-free boutiques, dragging their 6 bloated suitcases toward the boarding area just as the final call announcement echoed over the public address system. They expected red carpet treatment. Tyler approached the priority boarding lane with the swagger of a man who believed he owned the aircraft. He placed his digital boarding pass against the glass surface of the optical scanner. He expected the pleasant green chime of clearance. Instead, the machine flashed a harsh, glaring red light. A sharp, mechanical error tone buzzed through the speaker, halting the boarding process. The gate agent, maintaining a practiced customer service smile, typed rapidly on her terminal. Her expression shifted from polite accommodation to rigid professionalism. She looked Tyler in the eye and informed him that the entire 4-passenger itinerary had been voided by the primary cardholder. There were no refunds available. There was no rebooking option. They were denied boarding. Tyler does not possess the emotional regulation required to process the word no. His entire existence had been carefully constructed around Susan and David, shielding him from the consequences of his own failures. Confronted with a hard, impenetrable boundary in a public setting, his fragile ego splintered. The facade of the wealthy tech founder evaporated, revealing the petulant, volatile child underneath. He demanded the agent override the system, his voice rising to a frantic shout that echoed across the crowded waiting area. When she calmly refused and picked up her desk phone to request security, Tyler lost all remaining control. He slammed his fists against the fiberglass counter with blinding force. He swept his arm across the desk, knocking over a heavy metal display stand, scattering boarding documents, and screaming obscenities at the terrified airline staff. Los Angeles International Airport is a federal security zone. Threats of violence at a departure gate are not entertained. Within seconds, 2 armed airport police officers sprinted down the concourse, flanking him from behind. Tyler puffed out his chest, attempting to physically intimidate men wearing tactical vests and duty belts. It was a severe, humiliating miscalculation. One officer grabbed Tyler by the wrist, applying a swift, agonizing joint lock that forced him to his knees. The second officer shoved him face first onto the cold, patterned carpet of the terminal. The sharp, metallic click of steel handcuffs snapping shut around his wrists signaled the definitive end of his performance. Susan shrieked, dropping her designer handbag to the floor. She stepped forward, trying to pull the officers away from her son, unable to process the sight of her golden boy being treated like a common criminal. An officer firmly pushed her back, warning her to step away or face obstruction charges. David stood paralyzed, his jaw slack, staring at the floor in profound shock. Jasmine backed away, mortified beyond comprehension. She was a woman who built her entire lifestyle brand on the illusion of flawless aesthetics and high-class sophistication. Now, she was shrinking against a terminal window, hiding her face with her manicured hands as dozens of strangers held up their smartphones, recording her husband screaming from the floor. Tyler was dragged away to an airport holding room. He was eventually released with a formal citation for public disturbance and a permanent ban from flying with that specific airline network. The physical humiliation was thorough, but the financial hemorrhage was only just beginning. They still needed to get to the island. Jasmine, desperate to salvage her carefully curated vacation content and escape the staring eyes of the airport crowd, took charge of the situation. She marched her in-laws toward a different airline counter, intending to purchase immediate replacement fares. She handed the ticketing agent her sleek, heavy metal credit card, expecting a swift and seamless transaction. The card reader beeped. The screen displayed a harsh decline notification. Jasmine frowned, assuming it was a random fraud block triggered by the sudden, expensive purchase. She turned to Susan, asking for the premium travel card my mother loved to flash at country club dinners. Susan unzipped her purse with trembling fingers and handed over the plastic. The agent swiped it. Another beep. Another decline. Panic began to set in. David pulled out his leather wallet and offered his primary bank card. The account tied directly to his lifelong retirement savings. The agent inserted the chip, waited a few seconds, and shook her head. She turned the monitor slightly so Jasmine could read the bold text flashing on the screen. Available credit, 0. Jasmine froze. Her eyes darted from the monitor to my parents. She is a businesswoman who understands the flow of capital. She realized in that exact moment that the pristine financial facade of her in-laws was a hollow, rotting shell. Their retirement accounts were supposed to be untouchable, built over decades of hard work. Yet, every single line of credit was drained dry. A massive, silent void existed in their ledgers. She did not know that this was the trap I had set. Months ago, utilizing my forensic auditing credentials, I had uncovered the truth. Tyler had been quietly bleeding my parents dry, siphoning their life savings to fund his non-existent companies and his lavish lifestyle. To stop the bleeding, I had secretly established strict fraud alerts and spending caps on their remaining accounts. When I canceled the flight tickets, I simultaneously engaged the lockdown protocols. I trapped them in a financial cage of their own making. Jasmine turned her piercing gaze to Tyler, who had just returned from the holding room, rubbing his bruised wrists and avoiding eye contact, cornered by the interrogating glare of his wife. Tyler reached into the inner pocket of his wrinkled suit jacket. He pulled out a dark corporate credit card. It was an account he had always sworn was strictly reserved for his venture capital firm expenses. A card he claimed he could never touch for personal use. He slid it across the ticketing counter, breaking his own lie. He purchased 4 economy class tickets on a budget carrier, securing the cheapest seats available in the last row near the lavatories. The flight was scheduled to depart 6 grueling hours later. They spent the rest of the day sitting in rigid, suffocating silence on hard plastic chairs in a crowded, greasy food court. The glamorous Hawaiian getaway had devolved into a grueling endurance test. Jasmine stared blankly at her phone, the realization of her husband's deceit slowly wrapping around her throat. Susan and David looked aged, defeated by the sudden evaporation of their perceived wealth. But Tyler sat with his jaw clenched, staring at the departure board with toxic ambition. He nursed his bruised ego, convincing himself that this humiliation was merely a temporary setback. He knew the exact address of the exclusive coastal villa I had rented in Maui. He believed that the law of family entitlement would ultimately protect him. He planned to land on the island, show up at the property, punch in the gate code, and force his way into my sanctuary. He intended to walk through the front door and reassert his dominance over me, entirely unaware that the physical and legal boundaries I had established waiting for him across the ocean were far more unforgiving than a canceled flight. The cabin of the budget airline smelled of stale coffee and recycled breath. Jasmine sat squeezed into a middle seat in row 34, her knees pressing hard against the rigid plastic of the tray table in front of her. The physical discomfort of the cramped space mirrored the tightening knot of anxiety in her stomach. She turned her head to look at her husband. Tyler sat in the window seat, pretending to sleep. His jaw locked tight and his arms crossed defensively over his chest. Jasmine is a woman who built her entire lifestyle brand on authenticity and careful curation. She understands the flow of capital, the necessity of solid margins, and the importance of a clean ledger. Sitting in the dimly lit cabin, listening to the drone of the jet engines, her mind raced backward, analyzing the humiliating sequence of events at the terminal. Susan and David had spent their entire lives projecting the image of a secure, affluent couple. They hosted country club dinners, wore tailored golf apparel, and frequently boasted about their diversified retirement portfolio. Yet, when the ticketing agent ran their premium travel cards, the system returned a zero balance. This was not a standard security hold. It was a total depletion of available credit. Jasmine nudged Tyler, her elbow digging into his ribs. He kept his eyes closed, hoping she would stop probing. She pushed harder, leaning in so her voice would not carry over the hum of the aircraft. She demanded an explanation for the public financial collapse of his parents. Tyler shifted in his narrow seat, his body language radiating guilt. He refused to meet her piercing gaze. He rubbed the back of his neck, a classic physiological tell of deception, and muttered a disjointed excuse about a federal banking glitch. He claimed a temporary server synchronization error had frozen their assets, a routine security measure that would be cleared up by morning. Jasmine stared at the beads of sweat forming on his forehead. She recognized the lie immediately. She knew the difference between a temporary banking hold and an empty ledger. Her husband was hiding a fiscal black hole, and the realization chilled her more than the aggressive air conditioning blasting from the overhead vent. Miles ahead of them, I was already enjoying the tropical breeze of the island. I did not act out of sudden, impulsive rage at the airport. My response was the calculated execution of a financial quarantine I had designed months prior. In the field of forensic auditing, you learn to identify the bleed. The bleed is the slow, methodical draining of capital by a parasite who knows exactly how to manipulate the host. 6 months ago, my parents asked me to review their annual tax filings. I opened their digital portfolios and found the rot. Tyler had been quietly siphoning their retirement funds for years, masking the steady outbound transfers as seed capital investments for his non-existent tech ventures. My parents willingly signed the authorization forms, blinded by their unwavering belief in their golden son. They were steering their own ship directly into financial ruin, sacrificing their future to fund his expensive suits and leased vehicles. I could not legally stop them from giving him their cash, but I could build a dam around their secondary credit lines. Utilizing my professional credentials, I established rigid, automated fraud alerts on their remaining accounts. I set strict geographic fencing parameters. Any unusual activity, especially large purchases outside their normal spending habits, would trigger an immediate lockdown. Canceling their airline tickets was not merely a petty retaliation for a physical strike. It was the activation switch for the trap. By stranding them in Los Angeles, I forced them to trigger the spending alerts. When Jasmine attempted to buy those replacement tickets, the algorithm flagged the transaction, unwittingly slamming the vault door shut on my parents. Tyler was officially cut off from his primary funding source. The financial oxygen he relied upon to survive was gone. The budget flight touched down at Kahului Airport well past midnight. The terminal was practically deserted, the silence broken only by the squeak of their shoes on the polished floors. Tyler, Jasmine, and my parents dragged their 6 oversized suitcases off the luggage carousel. The heavy bags, once symbols of their vanity, now served as physical anchors weighing them down in the thick, humid tropical air. Exhaustion etched deep lines into my mother's face. She looked pale and frail, leaning heavily on the handle of her luggage. My father walked with a noticeable stoop, the reality of their declined cards still hanging heavily over his head. Jasmine maintained a rigid, furious silence, trailing 10 paces behind her husband. her eyes fixed on his back with a mix of suspicion and disgust. Tyler, however, possessed a toxic resilience, fueled entirely by delusion. As they exited the sliding glass doors into the warm Hawaiian night, he marched toward the taxi stand, projecting a renewed sense of authority. He flagged down a weary driver and ordered him to load the excessive baggage into the trunk. He barked out the address of the coastal property I had secured, using his sketchy corporate card to guarantee the exorbitant late-night fare. The ride to the estate took 45 minutes. The taxi navigated winding coastal roads wrapped in darkness, the headlights cutting through the dense, tropical foliage. Tyler sat in the front passenger seat, his confidence inflating with every passing mile. His internal logic was simple and deeply flawed. He believed that blood relation granted him an all-access pass to my resources, regardless of his behavior. He convinced himself that my departure at the airport was just a dramatic exit, a temporary display of dominance. He rehearsed his entry strategy in his head. He planned to walk through the front doors, offer a half-hearted apology, and immediately take control of the itinerary. He assumed that once they arrived at the $15,000 a night villa, I would yield to family pressure, open the gates, and allow them to claim the master suites. He planned to pour himself a glass of my expensive scotch and resume his role as the patriarch in waiting, utilizing my wealth to impress his skeptical wife. The taxi turned off the main highway, the tires crunching onto a private gravel drive lined with towering palm trees. The ocean waves crashed loudly against the nearby cliffs, masking the sound of the engine. The vehicle rounded the final bend, the headlights sweeping across the manicured landscape. Tyler reached for the door handle, ready to step out and claim his stolen paradise. He expected to see an open driveway leading to a grand, illuminated entrance where he could dump his heavy luggage and demand service. Instead, the headlights of the taxi washed over a different reality. The vehicle rolled to an abrupt stop. A towering, forged steel gate blocked the entire width of the driveway. The thick metal bars offered no gaps, no weaknesses, and no welcome. There was no visible keypad for guests to punch in a code. Only a sleek, black closed-circuit camera mounted high on a stone pillar, its red recording lens staring directly down at the idling taxi. The realization that they were locked out in the dark began to sink in, setting the stage for the next phase of their punishment. The taxi idled on the gravel shoulder, its headlights illuminating the heavy steel gates of the coastal estate. Tyler stepped out into the thick, humid air of the Hawaiian night. He adjusted the lapels of his wrinkled suit jacket, projecting a false air of authority for the benefit of his wife and my parents watching from the back seat. He walked straight toward the illuminated digital keypad mounted on the stone pillar. He typed the 6-digit access code he had secretly memorized from a forwarded copy of my original travel itinerary. He expected the heavy iron gates to swing open, welcoming him to the luxury he felt entitled to claim. Instead, a harsh, sustained error tone pierced the quiet night. A bright red light flashed on the panel. Tyler froze, his finger hovering over the keypad. He pressed the clear button and typed the numbers again, punching the keys with escalating force. The system delivered the exact same rejection. The red light washed over his sweating face. He did not know that within 5 minutes of arriving at the property earlier that afternoon, I had executed a standard security protocol. As the sole signatory on the $15,000 a night lease, I instructed the property management firm to wipe the existing entry codes and generate a new, encrypted sequence known only to me. I anticipated his arrival. I knew he would try to walk into my sanctuary as if he owned the title. Standing on the dark side of the gate, Tyler felt the eyes of his family burning into his back. His entire identity rested on maintaining dominance. Turning around and admitting defeat was not in his psychological vocabulary. The humiliation of the airport was still fresh, and facing another closed door pushed his fragile ego past the breaking point. He abandoned logic and surrendered to brute force. Tyler bent down and picked up a heavy piece of volcanic landscaping rock from the edge of the driveway. He raised it above his head and hurled it directly at the security camera and intercom system mounted above the keypad. The glass lens shattered. Plastic casing rained down onto the pavement. Emboldened by his own destructive outburst, he grabbed the wrought iron bars of the gate. He wedged his expensive leather shoes into the decorative metalwork and hoisted himself upward, attempting to scale the barrier. He failed to understand the architecture of modern luxury rentals. High net worth properties do not rely on passive metal fences to deter intruders. They rely on active, kinetic defense. I had reviewed the threat landscape and contracted a private security detail for the duration of my stay. 2 seasoned contractors, men who had previously operated in high-threat tactical environments, were stationed in the shadows of the manicured palm grove just inside the perimeter. They did not shout a warning. They did not attempt to negotiate. They responded to a perimeter breach with clinical efficiency. As Tyler threw his right leg over the top of the gate, his trousers caught on a decorative iron spike, tearing the fabric. Before he could untangle himself, the 2 guards stepped out from the darkness. One of them reached up, grabbed Tyler by the belt, and yanked him backward. Tyler plummeted toward the ground. He landed hard on the manicured grass inside the compound. The breath knocked out of his lungs. Before he could recover, the second guard drove a heavy tactical boot into the center of his back, pinning him flat against the turf. The guard grabbed Tyler by the wrists, twisting his arms upward until a sharp cry of pain echoed through the night. The swift, metallic zip of industrial restraints binding his hands together signaled the end of his invasion. On the other side of the gate, my mother screamed. Susan scrambled out of the taxi, rushing toward the iron bars, begging the men in dark tactical gear to release her son. David followed, standing helplessly on the gravel, paralyzed by the sight of his golden child eating dirt. Jasmine remained in the vehicle, her face illuminated by the glow of her smartphone, watching her marriage disintegrate in real time. The security contractors ignored the frantic pleading from the street. One of them tapped a radio earpiece and requested local law enforcement support. Maui Police Department cruisers navigate the island roads with remarkable speed when responding to a call at a premier estate. Less than 3 minutes later, flashing blue and red lights painted the palm trees. 2 uniformed officers stepped out of their vehicles, hands resting casually on their duty belts. The police officers did not care about family dynamics. They did not care about my mother crying, or my father attempting to explain that this was simply a misunderstanding between siblings. American property law is rigid, binary, and devoid of sentiment. The lead officer approached the gate. The security guard handed him a digital tablet displaying the verified lease agreement. The officer scrolled through the document, his flashlight illuminating the screen. He verified my signature, my identification details, and my status as the sole legal occupant of the compound. The officer looked down at Tyler, who was now sitting on the grass, his torn suit stained with mud and his hands bound behind his back. Tyler tried to deploy his usual charm, stammering that he was an invited guest, that I was his sister, and that he had a legal right to be on the premises. The officer shook his head, cutting off the excuse. Your name is nowhere on this contract. The leaseholder has not authorized your presence. You just destroyed private security equipment and attempted to jump a barrier. You are trespassing. The officer instructed the guards to release the zip ties. They hauled Tyler to his feet and shoved him roughly through the pedestrian side gate, ejecting him back onto the public street. The police issued a stark verbal warning. If Tyler or anyone in his party stepped 1 foot onto the private driveway again, they would be arrested and transported to the county jail for felony property damage and trespassing. The cruisers remained parked on the shoulder, their lights spinning, ensuring the unwanted guests vacated the area. The taxi driver, having witnessed the entire chaotic scene and unwilling to risk involvement in a police matter, dumped their 6 massive suitcases onto the asphalt, collected his inflated fare, and sped away into the night. At 2 a.m, my family stood stranded on the dark shoulder of a coastal highway. The ocean wind whipped around them, Tyler brushed the dirt off his ruined suit, refusing to meet the gaze of his parents. He turned toward his wife. "Jasmine," Tyler muttered, his voice stripped of all prior arrogance. "Pull up your ride-sharing app. Find us a hotel. Any hotel. Just book 2 rooms with your business card so we can get off this road." Jasmine stared at him. The cool night air felt heavy in her lungs. She opened her banking application, navigating to the corporate accounts tied to her lifestyle brand. She had worked relentlessly to build her company, carefully managing her margins and projecting an image of fierce independence. She tapped the screen to view her available balances. Her heart stopped. The numbers staring back at her were catastrophic. Her primary operating account was overdrawn. Her business credit lines were maxed out. She navigated to the transaction history, her eyes scanning the recent outbound transfers. A chilling pattern emerged. Large sums of capital had been systematically diverted from her accounts into a series of unfamiliar holding companies over the past 3 months. She looked up at Tyler. The puzzle pieces snapped into place. He had not just drained his parents' retirement fund. He had cannibalized her business to cover his hidden debts. He used his status as her husband to access her ledgers, bleeding her dry to sustain his illusion of wealth. "I have nothing," Jasmine whispered, the reality of her insolvency crashing over her. "The accounts are empty. You took everything." Tyler stepped back, his face turning pale in the moonlight. He had no defense. The lies he had spun to keep his world afloat were unraveling simultaneously. With no credit, no cash, and no transportation, their options evaporated. David managed to find a crumpled emergency $100 bill hidden in his wallet. They used a budget ride service to transport them and their ridiculous mountain of luggage away from the affluent coastline. They ended up 10 miles inland, standing before a decaying, neon-lit roadside motel. The paint peeled from the walls, and the parking lot smelled of stagnant water and cheap beer. It was the only establishment that accepted a cash deposit for a single, cramped room at 3 in the morning. Tyler dragged the bags up the concrete stairs, his designer shoes scuffing against the grime. He unlocked the thin wooden door to reveal a space infested with mold and crawling with roaches. The golden child had promised his family a luxury paradise. Instead, he had marched them directly into squalor, setting the stage for a desperate maneuver that would expose the true depth of his criminal exposure. The morning sun pierced through the cracked vinyl blinds of the roadside motel, illuminating the dust particles dancing in the stagnant air. The room smelled of mildew, cheap cleaning chemicals, and decades of regret. 4 adults occupied a space designed for transient strangers. My parents sat on the edge of a sagging mattress, their expensive resort wear wrinkled and stained. They stared at the flickering glow of a muted television. Stripped of the country club dignity they had worn like armor their entire lives, Jasmine sat in the corner chair, her knees pulled to her chest, her eyes fixed on the peeling wallpaper. She had not spoken a single word since discovering her drained business accounts. Tyler did not sit. He paced the narrow strip of stained carpet between the foot of the bed and the scratched wooden dresser. His designer suit jacket lay discarded on the floor, ruined by the mud from my security compound. A rational human being in his position would experience crushing remorse. They would apologize to their spouse for bankrupting her company and fall to their knees begging their parents for forgiveness after destroying their retirement. Tyler possessed no such capacity. His narcissism protected him from guilt, converting his profound humiliation into blinding, venomous rage. He required a villain to maintain his internal narrative, and he cast me in the role. He stopped pacing and pulled his phone from his pocket. His thumb struck the screen with aggressive force. He was preparing to launch a tactical strike against the only thing he knew I valued above my own comfort: my career. Miles away, the morning presented a starkly different reality. I sat on the expansive teak balcony of the coastal villa, wrapped in a plush robe. A gentle trade wind swept off the Pacific Ocean, carrying the scent of sea salt and blooming plumeria. I held a porcelain cup of espresso, watching the waves crash against the black volcanic rocks below. The environment was a masterclass in tranquility. My phone vibrated on the glass patio table. The screen displayed his name. I did not feel a spike of adrenaline. I felt the cold, familiar focus that takes over when I open a corrupted corporate ledger. I picked up the device, tapped the screen to accept the call, and pressed the speaker icon. I set the phone back down on the glass surface. I also reached into the pocket of my robe, retrieved my secondary work phone, and activated the voice recording application. I did not offer a greeting. I let the silence hang, forcing him to bridge the gap. "Listen to me very carefully," Tyler hissed through the speaker. His voice was ragged, stripped of the fake entrepreneurial polish he usually adopted. "You think you won last night? You think you can throw us onto the street and walk away? You made a fatal mistake, Vanessa." I took a slow sip of my espresso, letting the rich, bitter liquid coat my tongue. I remained entirely silent. "I spent the last 3 hours drafting a series of documents," Tyler continued, the tempo of his speech accelerating. "I have emails ready to send to every single equity partner on the board of your accounting firm. I have posts formatted for the professional networking platforms. I am going to expose you. I am going to tell them you manipulate risk assessment reports for personal kickbacks. I will fabricate a paper trail showing you funnel client capital into offshore shell companies. By the time I hit send, your precious license will be suspended pending a federal investigation. Your reputation will burn to the ground. You will never work in corporate finance again." He paused, breathing heavily into the receiver, waiting for me to beg. He expected tears. He expected the frantic pleading of a woman terrified of losing her professional identity. He wanted to hear my voice break so he could savor the reclamation of his power. I merely adjusted my position in the lounge chair, watching a distant sailboat glide across the horizon. "Here are the terms," Tyler demanded, mistaking my silence for submission. "You are going to text me the new gate code to the villa right now. You are going to vacate the master suite and stay out of my way. Then, you are going to initiate an immediate wire transfer of $50,000 in liquid cash directly into my checking account. You have until noon. If the money is not there, I press send and I destroy your life." The call ended with a sharp click. I picked up my secondary device and saved the audio file to an encrypted cloud server. Tyler believed he had just executed a brilliant power play. He lacked the legal comprehension to understand what he had actually accomplished. Threatening to ruin a professional reputation to extract a specific sum of cash across state lines via a telecommunications network is not a negotiation tactic. It is the textbook definition of felony extortion. He had just handed me the exact audio evidence required to secure a federal indictment. However, the threat of legal retaliation was secondary to the puzzle forming in my mind. The analytical engine that drives my career shifted into a higher gear. I replayed his demands, parsing the data points, stripping away the emotional venom to isolate the underlying motive. In the field of forensic accounting, you learn to look for anomalies. When an individual reacts disproportionately to a situation, it indicates the presence of a hidden variable. Tyler was trapped in a squalid motel room. His parents were broke. His wife was furious. A man trying to salvage a ruined family vacation would demand an apology. A man trying to escape a miserable island experience would demand return airfare. Tyler did not ask for a flight home. He demanded physical access to my luxury villa. More importantly, he demanded a highly specific, arbitrary sum of $50,000 in liquid cash, and he imposed a strict midday deadline. The variables did not align with a spoiled brother throwing a temper tantrum. $50,000 is not walking around money for a tourist. It is a bridge loan. It is a desperate infusion of capital required to hold off an immediate threat. I closed my eyes, visualizing his financial footprint. The drained retirement accounts, the cannibalized business credit lines, the frantic flight to the island. He was bleeding money at an unsustainable rate, yet he still required more. He was acting like a man with a gun pressed to his temple. He needed the villa not to relax by the pool, but to project an illusion of immense wealth. He needed the cash to buy himself time. The extortion attempt was a sloppy, desperate act of survival. Tyler was not fighting me for control of a family holiday. He was utilizing me as a human shield against a predator far more dangerous than anyone inside that dirty motel room. I opened my encrypted laptop, ready to bypass his public persona and dig straight into the darkest corners of his financial history. I needed to identify the monster he was running from, because that monster was about to dictate the rules of the war. The ocean breeze rolling off the Pacific felt entirely irrelevant now. I left the teak balcony and retreated into the climate-controlled quiet of the villa living room. I placed my espresso cup on the pristine marble kitchen island and opened my encrypted laptop. Forensic accounting is not a profession built on crunching numbers or balancing simple spreadsheets. It is the art of tracing human nature through digital footprints. Greed always leaves a visible trail. Panic leaves an illuminated highway. Tyler believed his morning extortion attempt demonstrated a position of power. I recognized the phone call for what it truly was, a glaring, erratic distress flare. To understand the root of his current desperation, one only had to look back at our shared history. 14 years ago, I learned the exact exchange rate of my family loyalty. I was 18 years old, holding an acceptance letter to a prestigious university accounting program. My entire college tuition fund, saved penny by penny from high school jobs and modest stock investments, vanished overnight. The ledger simply zeroed out. Tyler, then a senior in high school, had forged my signature on a withdrawal slip and drained the entire account. He did not steal my future to survive a hardship. He stole it to purchase a vintage European sports car. He wanted to impress the recruitment chairs of a wealthy fraternity. I printed the bank statements and presented them to my parents in our suburban living room, expecting swift justice. Instead, I received my defining lesson in survival. Susan patted my hand with condescending sympathy. David stared at the television, refusing to make eye contact with me. They did not demand Tyler return the stolen funds. They did not march him to the police station to report the fraud. My mother looked at me with a chilling, vacant sincerity and delivered a verdict that permanently rewired my brain. She told me Tyler possessed the mind of a visionary, a risk-taker destined for executive greatness. She called me a simple bean counter, someone who lacked the creative spark required to change the world. She instructed me to swallow the financial loss, take out high-interest student loans, and be a good sister to a brother who would one day support us all. That was the exact moment the obedient daughter died. The auditor was born in her place. I learned that emotional appeals are a currency without value. Only leverage dictates the outcome of a conflict. I pushed the memory into a locked mental compartment and initiated a deep dive into the current corporate entities tied to my brother. Tyler operated a tangled, chaotic web of limited liability companies, each nested within another like wooden dolls, designed to obscure true ownership. A standard credit check would return a mediocre score and a handful of maxed-out retail cards. I did not use standard commercial channels. I accessed specialized corporate databases, utilizing the secure credentials provided by my firm. I began tracing the routing numbers associated with the business accounts Jasmine had found empty just hours prior. Capital does not simply evaporate. It flows. I followed the outbound transfers. Tyler had funneled his wife operating capital into a shell corporation registered under a registered agent in Delaware. From that dark account, I tracked the digital breadcrumbs to a series of high-stakes venture capital networking platforms. I penetrated his public calendar profile, cross-referencing his recent outbound email communications and meeting requests. The primary motive for his sudden, frantic Hawaiian itinerary materialized on my high-resolution screen. Tyler had secured a preliminary pitch meeting scheduled for 3:00 this afternoon. The target of his presentation was a prominent venture capitalist who specialized in early-stage technology acquisitions. This particular investor was a man known for spending his summers on the island of Maui, requiring founders to travel to him for initial consultations. Tyler was not here to celebrate a wedding anniversary. He was here to hunt for a $2 million seed investment. I opened the executive summary he had submitted to the investment firm prior to the trip. The document was a masterpiece of corporate fiction. Tyler had constructed a deeply fraudulent persona. He claimed to be a self-made millionaire seeking a strategic partnership for a revolutionary software platform, rather than a desperate beggar seeking a bailout. To sell this grand illusion to a seasoned investor, he promised to host the afternoon pitch meeting at his private beachfront estate. He had even attached photographs of the exact villa I was currently occupying to his introductory emails, alongside images of a luxury catamaran he claimed to own and operate. He needed the physical space to validate his lies. If the venture capitalist arrived at the meeting location and found Tyler sweating in a roach-infested roadside motel alongside a ruined family, the facade would shatter on impact. The investor would walk away, taking the $2 million lifeline back to the mainland. That explained his aggressive demand for the gate code. That explained his willingness to risk a federal extortion charge for $50,000 in walking around money. He needed to buy props. He needed to rent a sports car, hire a private chef for the afternoon, and dress the set for his performance. But the puzzle remained incomplete. Why was the $2 million injection so urgent? Tyler had failed at business endeavors dozens of times before. He usually just retreated to the basement of our parents' house to lick his wounds, drain their checking accounts, and draft a new scheme. The frantic, violent energy driving him this weekend indicated a different kind of pressure. He was not chasing success. He was sprinting away from severe consequences. I expanded my search parameters. I abandoned the legitimate financial sector and moved into the gray market. I utilized a proprietary risk assessment algorithm designed by my firm to identify unregulated hard money loans. These are the shadow ledgers, the financial networks utilized by desperate individuals who have burned every bridge in traditional banking. These syndicates offer fast, undocumented capital at exorbitant interest rates, backed by the threat of physical violence rather than civil litigation. The algorithm hummed for 2 minutes before generating a match. A digital promissory note surfaced, buried deep within a decentralized ledger. The primary borrower was Tyler. The principal amount borrowed was $500,000. I scrutinized the terms of the loan. It was issued 6 months ago by a syndicate known in the forensic accounting industry for ruthless asset recovery tactics. They do not send polite collection letters when a debtor defaults. They do not file liens or wait for a judge to issue a summary judgment. They deploy enforcers. They extract their capital in flesh and terror. I scrolled down to check the maturity date on the contract. The ambient temperature of the room seemed to drop as my eyes locked onto the digital timestamp. The $500,000 debt matured this coming Friday. The reality of his situation crystallized with terrifying clarity. The final puzzle piece snapped into place. Tyler was not a spoiled tourist throwing a temper tantrum over a ruined vacation. He was a dead man walking. He had borrowed $500,000 from apex predators, incinerated the cash on his failed startups, and exhausted every legitimate credit line his family possessed. His only chance of physical survival was securing the $2 million venture capital investment this afternoon. He needed that specific injection of legitimate corporate funds to wash the money and pay off the syndicate before the Friday deadline expired. And securing that investment required him to steal my villa to finalize the illusion of his success. If he failed to secure that funding today, the shadow lenders would not just seize his non-existent assets. They would take his life. The stakes of this Hawaiian getaway had escalated from a petty family dispute into a lethal countdown. I closed the encrypted laptop, the soft click of the lid echoing in the silent room. The financial quarantine I had initiated at the airport was designed to teach him a lesson in humility. I had unknowingly locked him in a cage with a ticking bomb. He was cornered, destitute, and running out of hours. A man facing imminent death does not negotiate rationally. He relies on brute force and reckless action. He would not sit in that squalid motel room and wait for the venture capitalist to cancel the meeting. He would attempt to seize the coastal property by any means necessary before 3 o'clock. He was about to make the most dangerous move of his life, and I needed to ensure the defense perimeter was ready for a hostile breach. The digital clock on the stained nightstand of the roadside motel clicked to 1 in the afternoon. 2 hours remained until the venture capital meeting that would dictate whether my brother lived or died. The cramped room felt like a designated holding cell. Jasmine lay curled on the edge of the sagging mattress, her breathing shallow and uneven, exhausted from a night of silent weeping over her bankrupted company. My parents slept in the adjacent twin bed, their posture rigid even in unconsciousness, defeated by the sudden evaporation of their fabricated wealth. Tyler stood near the window, peering through the cracked vinyl blinds. Sweat pooled at the collar of his wrinkled dress shirt. His heart hammered a frantic, irregular rhythm against his ribs. The walls of the cheap room were closing in, mirroring the invisible perimeter established by the shadow lenders hunting him. He could not host a $2 million pitch meeting in a roach-infested parking lot. He needed the coastal estate. He needed the infinity pool, the imported marble, and the illusion of limitless capital. On the scarred wooden dresser, a set of car keys rested next to my father's leather wallet. Earlier that morning, using his last emergency $100 bill, David had managed to secure a battered, beige compact rental car from a local agency just to get them off the highway. Tyler stared at the keys. He did not ask for permission. He did not wake his wife or his parents to explain his departure. He grabbed the keys, slipped out the thin wooden door, and moved silently down the concrete walkway. The beige economy sedan sputtered to life. Tyler gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white as he steered the vehicle onto the coastal highway. The drive back toward my rented sanctuary was a journey fueled by pure, unadulterated panic. Every passing mile amplified the ticking clock in his mind. He rehearsed his lies, practicing the steady baritone he used to charm gullible investors. He told himself that rules were malleable, that security perimeters could always be breached with enough leverage. He parked the compact sedan half a mile down the road, hiding the cheap vehicle behind a dense grove of banyan trees. He could not risk a high-profile investor seeing a budget rental parked outside a billionaire compound. Tyler walked the remaining distance along the gravel shoulder, keeping low, using the lush tropical foliage for cover. He reached the edge of the property just in time to witness a sleek, black chauffeured town car pull out of the main gates. Through the tinted rear window, he caught a fleeting glimpse of my silhouette. He watched the vehicle turn left, heading toward the exclusive spa resorts located further down the coastline. A surge of triumphant adrenaline rushed through his veins. He believed the universe had just handed him the perfect opening. He assumed I would be gone for hours, indulging in hot stone massages and thermal baths, leaving the estate vulnerable to infiltration. Tyler emerged from the tree line and approached the pedestrian side gate. A towering private security contractor stood guard, his arms crossed over a dark tactical vest. The guard possessed the rigid, unyielding posture of a former military operator. Tyler smoothed his ruined suit jacket, plastering on the charismatic smile he reserved for closing deals. He walked up to the iron bars, projecting an aura of misplaced authority. He introduced himself as my brother, utilizing his surname like a skeleton key. He spun a frantic, polished narrative. He claimed an emergency scheduling conflict had forced him to host a vital corporate partner today. He pointed down the road, noting that I had just left for the afternoon. He only needed access to the patio and the pool area for 2 hours. He promised to conduct his business and vanish long before I returned. The security contractor did not blink. He did not shift his weight. He looked at Tyler with blank, unimpressed eyes and informed him that no unauthorized personnel were permitted on the grounds under any circumstances. Tyler felt the familiar sting of rejection, but the looming threat of the Shadow Syndicate pushed him past his usual breaking point. Charisma had failed. It was time to deploy bribery. He reached into his back pocket and extracted his wallet. He pulled out a stack of crumpled $100 bills, the very last remnants of cash he had siphoned from his wife's business accounts. He flattened the bills against his thigh. $1,000. He held the money through the iron bars. The guard glanced at the cash, then back at Tyler's face, offering no reaction. Tyler swallowed hard, realizing the cash alone was insufficient to sway a high-level contractor. He needed to offer a premium asset. He unfastened the heavy, stainless steel dive watch from his left wrist. The timepiece carried the iconic crown logo, the sweeping second hand, and the polished weight of a genuine luxury artifact. Tyler always wore it to client meetings, using it as a silent testament to his fabricated success. To a casual observer, the watch projected Swiss engineering and elite status. A seasoned appraiser would notice the slightly misaligned bezel and the inferior movement mechanism. It was a high-grade replica, sourced from an underground market in Macau, worth perhaps $300. Tyler held the fake watch out alongside the crumpled cash. He pushed his face against the iron gate, dropping the billionaire persona entirely, his voice cracking with raw, pathetic desperation. "Take it," Tyler pleaded, his breath shallow. "The watch is worth 15 grand retail. The cash is a bonus. I just need the patio for 2 hours. My entire life depends on this meeting. Just look the other way. Let me in. And you keep everything. Nobody has to know." The security contractor studied the desperate man. He reached through the bars, his large, calloused hand accepting the crumpled bills and the fake timepiece. He slipped the bribe into his tactical pocket, without uttering a single word. The guard turned and keyed a sequence into the control panel. The heavy magnetic lock disengaged with a sharp metallic click. The iron gate swung open. Tyler let out a ragged exhale of relief. He pushed past the guard, stepping into the lush, manicured courtyard of the estate. He felt the cool mist from the central fountain wash over his sweating face. The delusion took hold of him once again. He believed he had outsmarted the system. He believed his ability to hustle had saved him from execution. He jogged toward the main patio, taking inventory of the luxurious surroundings. The infinity pool blended seamlessly with the azure waters of the Pacific Ocean. The outdoor kitchen featured polished granite countertops and premium stainless steel appliances. Tyler moved quickly, determined to set the stage for his performance. He found the outdoor climate-controlled wine refrigerator. He did not hesitate to steal my assets to fund his lie. He pulled out a rare, vintage Bordeaux, a bottle worth more than the cheap sedan he had driven to get here. He located 2 crystal glasses in the teak cabinets. He arranged the wine and the glasses on the low table facing the ocean, creating a scene of effortless, refined wealth. He walked to the edge of the infinity pool, splashing cool water onto his face, attempting to wash away the grime of the motel. He ran his fingers through his hair, adjusted his collar, and took a deep breath. He stood tall, practicing his confident, relaxed posture. He was ready to play the visionary founder. He was ready to secure the $2 million lifeline. He had no idea that his entire infiltration was a carefully orchestrated theater production, and he was merely a puppet dancing on my strings. Less than 2 miles away, I sat inside a secluded, glass-walled cedar sauna at a private wellness club. The air was thick with heat and the sharp, purifying scent of eucalyptus steam. I wore a simple white towel, sitting in perfect stillness on the wooden bench. My waterproof tablet rested on my lap, the screen glowing brightly in the dim light. I was not reading financial reports. I was watching a live, high-definition video feed streaming directly from a tactical body camera mounted on the chest of my security contractor. I watched the entire encounter at the gate unfold in crisp resolution. I saw Tyler sweat. I heard his voice crack as he begged a stranger for salvation. I watched him hand over the crumpled bills and the counterfeit watch. I watched the contractor, acting on my precise, real-time instructions relayed through his earpiece. Accept the bribe and open the gate. A slow, measured smile altered the stoic lines of my face. The heat of the sauna contrasted beautifully with the cold, calculating satisfaction expanding in my chest. Tyler thought he had breached my defenses. He did not realize I had opened the door and invited him into the slaughterhouse. I wanted him on that patio, I wanted him to set up his crystal glasses and pour my expensive wine. I wanted him to inflate his chest with the false confidence of a man who believed he was about to conquer the world. The trap required him to be at the absolute peak of his delusion when the floor collapsed beneath him. The digital clock on my tablet shifted to 2:45 in the afternoon. My secondary phone vibrated, displaying a text message from the perimeter surveillance network. A silver Bentley had just turned onto the coastal road, heading straight for the estate gates. The venture capitalist was arriving. The target was moving into position, and I stood up from the cedar bench, ready to deliver a financial execution he would never forget. The silver Bentley Continental glided onto the private gravel drive exactly at 3 in the afternoon. From my vantage point in the darkened living room, standing behind the floor-to-ceiling tinted glass doors, I watched the vehicle roll to a halt near the edge of the courtyard. I had returned from the wellness club 10 minutes prior, utilizing the rear service entrance to bypass my own security perimeter. I wore a black designer swimsuit draped with a sheer silk sarong, holding a crystal glass filled with a chilled tropical cocktail. I remained motionless in the shadows, waiting for the theater production on my patio to reach its climax. Tyler stood near the edge of the infinity pool, attempting to project the relaxed confidence of a billionaire welcoming a peer. The pale tan line on his left wrist, where his counterfeit watch had rested before he handed it to my security guard, served as a glaring physical marker of his exposed fraud. He smoothed the lapels of his ruined suit, forcing a bright, charismatic smile as the chauffeur opened the rear door of the Bentley. The man who stepped out did not wear the casual resort attire typical of tourists. He wore a crisp, tailored linen suit, his posture radiating the innate authority of a man accustomed to dictating market trends. He was a seasoned venture capitalist, a predator in the corporate ecosystem who commanded a portfolio worth billions. Tyler stepped forward, extending his hand. He launched into his rehearsed greeting, his voice carrying over the sound of the crashing waves. He welcomed the investor to his humble coastal retreat, spinning a narrative about needing a quiet sanctuary to escape the relentless pace of Silicon Valley. He gestured toward the teak table, inviting his guests to sit. I watched Tyler lift the bottle of vintage Bordeaux he had stolen from my climate-controlled refrigerator. He poured the rich, dark liquid into the crystal glasses, his hands maintaining a steady rhythm. The investor accepted the glass, taking a slow sip, his sharp eyes scanning the imported marble and the flawless landscaping. The physical environment performed the heavy lifting for my brother. The sheer expense of the estate lent an unearned credibility to the man sitting at the table. Tyler opened his leather-bound portfolio. He began his pitch. Even through the thick glass, I could read his body language. He leaned forward, utilizing aggressive hand gestures to emphasize his talking points. He deployed a barrage of technical jargon, discussing scalable infrastructure, decentralized user acquisition, and projected revenue multiples. It was a flawless recitation of corporate buzzwords designed to mask a hollow ledger. He painted the picture of a revolutionary software platform that only required a minor $2 million seed injection to dominate the global market. The investor listened with an impassive expression. Men of his caliber do not betray emotion during a negotiation. He studied the printed executive summary, tracing the financial projections with his index finger. Tyler took this silence as a signal of victory. The adrenaline of the con surged through him. He believed he was seconds away from securing the capital required to wash his debts and escape the shadow syndicate hunting him. Tyler reached into his jacket pocket and retrieved a heavy gold pen. He slid the final page of the document across the teak table. The term sheet, a contract binding the investor to a $2 million transfer. The investor set his wine glass down. He reached for the pen. I stepped up to the sliding glass door and disengaged the lock. The metal track glided open with a soft, distinct hiss. The sound cut through the ambient noise of the ocean. Tyler turned his head, his charismatic smile freezing in place. His eyes locked onto me. His brain struggled to process the visual data. He had assumed I was miles away, trapped in a spa, ignorant of his infiltration. Seeing me step onto the sunlit patio in a designer swimsuit, radiating calm ownership, triggered a catastrophic system failure in his mind. He opened his mouth, likely preparing to dismiss me as an assistant or a confused neighbor. I did not grant him the opportunity to construct another lie. "Richard," I said, keeping my voice level and pleasant, "I did not expect to see you on my patio today." The investor paused, his fingers hovering inches above the gold pen. He looked up from the term sheet, his brow furrowing in confusion. The recognition registered a second later. He stood up from the teak chair, a genuine smile breaking through his professional mask. "Vanessa," the investor replied, his tone warm and familiar. "I had no idea this was your property." The leasing agent mentioned a corporate client had secured the estate for the month, but they kept the name confidential. Tyler sat paralyzed in his chair, the blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a pale, sickly gray. His jaw hung slack. He looked between the two of us, the realization dropping like a stone in his stomach. The man sitting at my teak table was not a random target Tyler had found on an angel investor message board. He was Richard Vance, the managing partner of a premier equity firm based in Los Angeles. More importantly, his firm was one of the largest corporate audit clients my agency serviced. I had spent the last 3 years dismantling corrupted ledgers and identifying toxic acquisitions for his board of directors. We did not just share a professional acquaintance. We shared a foundation of absolute financial trust. I walked toward the table, the ice clinking in my cocktail glass. I offered Richard a polite nod before turning my attention to the sweating, trembling man sitting across from him. "I am leasing the compound for a few weeks to review some files in peace," I explained to Richard, keeping my gaze fixed on my brother. I turned to Tyler, adopting the sharp, dismissive tone one reserves for disobedient hired help. "Did you finish scrubbing the primary pool filters?" The property manager emailed me this morning, complaining that the circulation pump was jammed with debris. "Do not loiter on the furniture when you are finished. The service exit is through the side gate." The billionaire mask Tyler had spent hours gluing to his face shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. He could not speak. The humiliation paralyzed his vocal cords. Stripped of his fake Rolex, his stolen wine, and his borrowed real estate, he was reduced to a sweaty, trespassing fraud. Richard slowly lowered himself back into the teak chair. The warmth vanished from his eyes. He is a predator who built his empire by identifying deception. He looked at the torn fabric on Tyler's trousers. He noted the missing watch. He looked at the stolen Bordeaux. The equation balanced itself in his mind. I stepped closer to the table, trailing my fingertips over the leather portfolio. I pulled the executive summary toward me. I scanned the title of the shell company printed on the cover page. A cold, clinical satisfaction washed over me. The trap was perfect. I slid the document back across the table, stopping it directly in front of Richard. "I audited your prospective acquisitions portfolio last month," I said, shifting my tone from casual host to forensic investigator. "Do you recall the third-quarter risk assessment I submitted to your board? I specifically highlighted a cluster of nested corporate entities registered in Delaware. They demonstrated zero operational revenue, fabricated user metrics, and a high probability of immediate capital flight." Richard stared at the printed term sheet, his jaw muscles clenching. "This is the shell company I red-flagged," I stated, delivering the fatal strike. "You are sitting across from a phantom ledger. He does not own this property. He does not own a company. He is attempting to secure your capital to cover catastrophic personal debts." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. The ocean breeze seemed to stop. Richard did not yell. Powerful men do not throw temper tantrums when they discover a threat. They execute a swift, lethal correction. He picked up the gold pen, examined it for a fraction of a second, and tossed it into the infinity pool. The heavy metal sank to the bottom of the azure water. He picked up the term sheet and the executive summary. His hands moved with deliberate, mechanical force. He tore the heavy stock paper directly down the middle. He placed the shredded halves together and tore them again. He dropped the ruined pieces of Tyler Future onto the wet patio stone. "You wasted my time," Richard said, his voice dropping to a low, unforgiving register. "You attempted to leverage my own auditor against me to steal my capital." Tyler finally found his voice. A pathetic, ragged whisper. "Richard, please. The metrics are real. I just need the seed money to scale the infrastructure. I can pivot the model." Richard stood up, adjusting the cuffs of his linen suit. He looked down at Tyler with an expression of pure, clinical disgust. "You do not have a model to pivot," Richard informed him. "I sit on the advisory board of every major venture network from Seattle to San Diego. By the time my car reaches the highway, your name, your face, and your shell company will be permanently blacklisted across the entire West Coast financial sector. No reputable firm will ever read your emails. No angel investor will ever take your meeting. You are financially dead." Richard turned to me, offering a curt nod of professional respect. "Thank you for the intervention, Vanessa. I will expect your finalized audit report on Monday." I raised my cocktail glass in acknowledgement. "Safe travels, Richard." The venture capitalist walked off the patio, ignoring the frantic, sobbing apologies Tyler sputtered behind him. The chauffeur opened the door of the Bentley. The heavy door closed with a solid thud, sealing Tyler's fate. The silver vehicle glided down the driveway, slipping past the iron gates, taking the $2 million lifeline back to the mainland. I stood on the patio, sipping my drink, watching the dust settle on the gravel. Tyler remained in the teak chair. He stared at the torn pieces of paper scattered across the stone tiles. The illusion was gone. The potential for a corporate bailout was permanently erased. The reality of his situation crashed down upon him with the weight of a collapsing building. It was Wednesday afternoon. He owed $500,000 to a syndicate of ruthless shadow lenders, and the deadline expired on Friday. He had no money, no credit, no assets, and no future. His execution was no longer a theoretical risk. It was a scheduled event. I watched his hands begin to shake. The trembling moved up his arms, taking over his shoulders. The despair in his eyes mutated. The realization that he was going to die stripped away the last remnants of his humanity. The panic receded, replaced by a feral, unadulterated violence. He slowly turned his head, his bloodshot eyes locking onto me. The air grew dense. The financial war had concluded, and the physical retaliation was about to begin. The silver Bentley disappeared down the long stretch of the coastal highway, taking the $2 million lifeline with it. The dust settled on the gravel driveway, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Tyler remained seated at the teak patio table. He stared at the torn pieces of the term sheet, fluttering gently in the ocean breeze. The reality of his situation did not wash over him gradually. It crashed into him with the crushing weight of a collapsing concrete structure. He had 48 hours until a syndicate of shadow lenders demanded $500,000 in liquid capital. He possessed empty bank accounts, maxed out credit lines, and a burned reputation that would ensure no legitimate financial institution would ever take his calls again. The illusion of his success was dead. His survival timeline was expiring. I did not remain on the ground level to witness the fallout. A seasoned auditor understands the mechanics of risk. When a cornered animal realizes it has no avenue of escape, it lashes out at the nearest available target. I turned my back on the patio, stepped through the sliding glass door, and engaged the heavy, steel locking mechanism. I moved swiftly across the imported marble floor, ascended the spiral wooden staircase, and stepped out onto the expansive second-floor balcony. The elevated vantage point offered physical safety and a clear, unobstructed view of the entire courtyard. Down below, the paralysis broke. Tyler stood up from the table. The polished, charismatic facade he had spent years cultivating peeled away, revealing the raw, feral core of a man stripped of his safety nets. He kicked the heavy teak chair, sending it tumbling over the edge of the patio and splashing into the infinity pool. He unleashed a guttural, primal scream, screaming a string of incoherent obscenities into the humid tropical air. He paced the stone tiles, his hands tearing at his hair. He needed an outlet for the suffocating terror gripping his chest. He could not strike the shadow lenders. He could not strike the venture capitalist. He looked up at the reinforced glass of the villa, realizing he could not breach the physical security of the house. His bloodshot eyes darted across the manicured landscape, searching for a target. His gaze locked onto the main driveway. Parked near the pristine hedges was the vehicle I had secured for the week. It was a high-performance, convertible sports car, featuring a custom pearl white paint job and a genuine leather interior. It represented the effortless wealth and stability he felt entitled to, but lacked the discipline to earn. To Tyler, the car was a physical manifestation of my independence and his failure. He marched toward the edge of the pool. Resting on a stone pedestal was a heavy, carved basalt statue, a traditional Hawaiian decorative piece weighing roughly 40 pounds. Tyler wrapped his hands around the rough volcanic rock. His muscles strained, the veins in his neck bulging against his collar as he hoisted the heavy stone block off its base. He carried the statue across the courtyard, his breathing heavy and erratic. He reached the sports car and did not hesitate. He raised the basalt block high above his head and brought it down on the center of the windshield. The impact sounded like a localized explosion. The safety glass did not shatter immediately. It bowed inward, a dense spiderweb of white fractures spreading outward from the point of impact. Tyler grunted, lifting the heavy stone and slamming it down a second time. The reinforced barrier gave way. Shards of safety glass sprayed across the premium leather seats and scattered over the paved driveway. The destruction offered him a fleeting, toxic rush of control. He moved to the hood of the vehicle, slamming the rock against the pristine metal, leaving deep, jagged craters in the custom paint. He struck the driver's side window, obliterating the glass. He was sweating profusely, his expensive dress shirt torn at the shoulder, panting like a wild predator consuming a kill. He was so consumed by his destructive frenzy that he failed to hear the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. A yellow island taxi rolled through the open security gate. The contractor had abandoned his post after the bribery exchange, leaving the perimeter unsealed. The taxi rolled to a stop just a few yards behind the ruined sports car. The rear passenger door opened. Jasmine stepped out into the blinding afternoon sun. She had tracked his phone location through a shared family application. Desperate to find the man who had bankrupted her company, she came seeking answers, expecting to find him groveling, perhaps negotiating a loan or plotting another scheme. Instead, she walked into a scene of pure, unhinged criminality. Jasmine stopped dead in her tracks. Her designer purse slipped from her fingers, landing softly on the gravel. She stared at the man she had married. She had built a lucrative lifestyle brand founded on the aesthetics of refinement, wellness, and curated elegance. She sold her followers a narrative of a perfect, wealthy marriage. The reality of her marriage was currently standing in a pile of shattered glass, brandishing a heavy rock, destroying a rented vehicle in a fit of feral rage. Tyler looked up from the ruined hood of the car, his chest heaving. He locked eyes with his wife. He offered no explanation. He held no remorse. He just stared at her with the hollow, desperate eyes of a man who had nothing left to lose. Jasmine did not scream. The shock paralyzed her vocal cords. She realized in that exact moment that every instinct she had suppressed about his character was true. He was not an eccentric visionary experiencing a run of bad luck. He was a dangerous, volatile fraud. From my position on the second-floor balcony, I held my smartphone steady. The high-definition camera lens captured the entire sequence. The lighting was optimal. The framing included the ruined vehicle, the weapon in his hands, and the unmistakable identity of the perpetrator. The evidence was secured, but the physical threat remained active. I needed him off the property before his rage pivoted toward his wife, or he attempted to find a way into the main house. I leaned over the glass railing of the balcony, projecting my voice so it carried clearly over the courtyard. "I am calling the Maui Police Department," I shouted, injecting just enough urgency into my tone to sell the deception. "They will be here in 3 minutes to put you in cuffs." Tyler. The word police acted as a bucket of ice water dumped over his fevered brain. The adrenaline spike of the vandalism vanished, replaced instantly by the cold, paralyzing fear of incarceration. He dropped the basalt statue. The heavy rock hit the pavement with a dull thud, rolling to a stop near Jasmine's feet. Tyler looked at the balcony, then at his wife. A man with a shred of decency would have taken his spouse by the hand, apologized, and faced the consequences. Tyler possessed only a primal instinct for self-preservation. He sprinted past Jasmine without uttering a single syllable. He did not look back. He ran down the long gravel driveway, his ruined dress shoes kicking up dust, fleeing toward the cheap beige sedan he had hidden behind the banyan trees. A minute later, the screech of cheap tires echoed down the coastal road as he sped away, leaving his wife standing alone amidst the wreckage of his temper tantrum. Tyler gripped the steering wheel of the rental car, his mind racing to calculate his next move. He believed he was merely running from a local misdemeanor. He assumed my threat involved a squad car, a property damage citation, and perhaps a night in the county jail. He figured he could lay low on the other side of the island, avoid the local patrol units, and figure out a way to evade the shadow lenders. He was operating on an outdated, civilian understanding of the law. I lowered my smartphone and tapped the screen to end the recording. I did not open the dialing pad to call local dispatch. Local police would arrive, take a statement, photograph the car, and file a standard vandalism report. The bureaucratic friction of a municipal department was far too slow for the trap I had designed. I walked back inside the villa, sat at the kitchen island, and opened my encrypted laptop. I retrieved the audio file from the morning, the clear, unedited recording of Tyler threatening to destroy my corporate career unless I wired him $50,000. I retrieved the video file I had just captured, showing the suspect executing an unhinged, violent attack on private property. I merged the files into a single, highly compressed digital dossier. I did not route the package to the Maui police. Through my role as a senior forensic auditor, I maintained direct communication channels with federal regulatory agencies. I bypassed local authorities entirely and submitted the dossier directly to the Cybercrime and Extortion Task Force of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. By fleeing the scene, Tyler believed he was dodging a minor inconvenience. He failed to realize that the physical destruction of the vehicle was the final catalyst I needed. The vandalism demonstrated an escalation of threat, providing the federal authorities with the justification required to prioritize the warrant. The conflict had officially crossed the boundary from a toxic family dispute into an active federal crime scene. Tyler was no longer a brother throwing a tantrum on an island vacation. He was a fugitive on the run from the United States government, and the net closing around him was made of forged steel. The shattered safety glass resting on the paved driveway caught the afternoon sunlight, scattering bright reflections across the manicured lawn. Jasmine stood motionless near the idling island taxi. She stared at the ruined sports car, processing the scene with a chilling clarity. For years, she had curated a pristine digital existence, building a lifestyle brand founded on wellness, elegance, and trust. She had convinced herself that her husband was a misunderstood visionary, seeing him wield a heavy volcanic rock, destroying property in a feral panic before abandoning her without a backward glance, shattered that illusion permanently. She did not scream or collapse in tears. The shock functioned as a powerful clarifying agent, stripping away her emotional attachments and leaving only cold, pragmatic survival instincts. She reached down, picked up her designer purse from the gravel, and stepped back into the taxi. She instructed the driver to take her to a quiet location on the North Shore, far away from the coastal estate and the squalid roadside motel. During the ride, she opened her phone and bypassed the standard communication channels. She sent a secure, Encrypted text message directly to my private number. The message contained an address for an isolated coffee shop and a specific time. She requested a meeting, promising vital intelligence regarding the financial trap closing around our family. An hour later, I pulled into the empty parking lot of the cafe, driving a discreet rental sedan the concierge had arranged for me. The establishment was a minimalist wooden structure overlooking a secluded cove. I stepped inside and found Jasmine sitting at a corner table. She had stripped away the curated influencer aesthetic. The expensive jewelry was gone. Her posture lacked the practiced, camera-ready angles she usually deployed. She looked exhausted, yet her eyes projected a sharp, calculating focus. She was no longer playing the role of the supportive wife. She was a businesswoman assessing a catastrophic loss, preparing to salvage her remaining assets. I took a seat across from her and ordered a black coffee. We did not exchange pleasantries. The time for polite family fiction had expired. "I am not here to apologize for him," Jasmine stated, keeping her voice low and even. "I am here to negotiate an extraction." I nodded, appreciating her directness. "You checked your corporate ledgers last night. You saw the outbound transfers." He bled my operating accounts dry. She confirmed, her jaw tightening. He funneled my liquid capital into his shell companies to sustain his charade. I have zero cash reserves, but the core of my enterprise remains intact. The intellectual property, the trademarked formulations, the digital domain rights, those are legally registered under my name. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. The problem is the corporate architecture. He convinced you to nest your limited liability company inside his primary holding group for tax benefits. Jasmine closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, acknowledging the fatal error. Yes, my brand is tethered to his sinking ship. I know what happens next. Vanessa, you are an auditor. You know the federal authorities will eventually intervene. When the government unravels his fraud, they will freeze every single entity connected to his name. My patents, my trademarks, my entire life work will be locked in federal probate for years. I will lose everything. She opened her eyes, locking her gaze onto mine. I need your forensic skills. I need you to map the digital architecture and execute a clean, legal incision. I need you to peel my legitimate assets away from his fraudulent shell companies before the authorities drop the net. I need a clear financial separation to expedite a divorce. I took a slow sip of my coffee. Untangling nested corporate entities on the verge of a federal indictment is complex, highly sensitive work. It requires navigating layers of obfuscated data and establishing undeniable proof of distinct ownership. It is not a favor granted lightly. Information is currency. Jasmine, I replied, setting the porcelain cup on the wooden table. I require a return on my investment. I already know he is running from a shadow syndicate. I know he owes $500,000 by this Friday. What I do not understand is how a man with his dismal credit history secured that level of funding from apex predators. Shadow lenders do not issue unsecured loans based on a charming pitch. They require premium, tangible collateral. Jasmine leaned forward, resting her forearms on the table. She delivered the intelligence that would seal my brother's fate. He did not secure the loan on his own merit, Jasmine revealed, her tone devoid of sympathy. 6 months ago, he approached the syndicate. He pledged the only premium asset left in your family. He collateralized the debt using your parents' suburban home. The pieces of the puzzle locked together with a chilling resonance. I maintained my neutral expression, refusing to betray the satisfaction expanding in my chest. He does not own that property, I pointed out. He forged their signatures on a deed transfer. Jasmine explained. He fabricated a shadow lien on the house. Your parents have no idea. They think their home is safe, paid off, and secure. They still believe he is their golden child. If that $500,000 debt is not settled by Friday, the enforcers will not bother with a civil foreclosure. They will execute an extrajudicial eviction. They will arrive at that house, throw your parents onto the street, and liquidate the property. The irony was profound. Echoing with a dark, poetic justice, Susan and David had spent their entire lives enabling Tyler, shielding him from consequences, and demanding I sacrifice my own future to support his visions. Now, the very son they worshipped had quietly signed away the roof over their heads to fund his delusions. Jasmine watched my face, waiting for a reaction. She expected me to express horror or panic regarding the fate of my parents. She did not know the secret I held. 3 months prior, anticipating the inevitable collapse of Tyler financial schemes, I had executed a quiet, ruthless maneuver. I had convinced Susan and David to place their home into an irrevocable corporate trust managed by my firm, selling them the concept as an advanced elder care tax shield. The trust legally locked the property, shielding it from external claims. Tyler forged lien from 6 months ago as a ticking time bomb, but it was attached to a bunker I had already sealed in concrete. The shadow lenders held a worthless piece of paper. When they discovered the deception, their retaliation against Tyler would be biblical. I did not share this information with Jasmine. I needed her to believe the stakes remained critical. You deliver his personal laptop and all unencrypted access codes to me tonight, I countered, establishing the terms of our alliance. I need the raw data to finalize the federal package and trace the origin of the forged lien. In exchange, I will utilize my firm resources to isolate your intellectual property. I will construct a firewall around your trademarks and provide the forensic documentation your divorce attorney needs to sever your liability. Jasmine did not hesitate. We have a deal. I will return to the motel, pack my belongings, and secure his devices while he is paralyzed by his own panic. She stood up, extending her hand. We shook on it. It was a cold, pragmatic pact forged in the ruins of a toxic family structure. Jasmine walked out of the coffee shop, stepping into the tropical sunlight, ready to dismantle her marriage and reclaim her independence. I remained at the table, finishing my coffee. The financial perimeter was secured, and the legal trap was armed. But the battlefield was about to shift from digital ledgers to physical survival. News travels fast in the underground economy. The venture capitalist rejection had undoubtedly reached the mainland by now. The Shadow Syndicate would not wait until the Friday deadline to verify the status of their collateral. They would demand an immediate explanation for the failed funding round. The predators were already mobilizing, turning their attention toward a squalid roadside motel on the island of Maui, preparing to collect their debt in flesh. Information travels through the financial sector at the speed of light. While legitimate markets rely on press releases and quarterly reports, the underground economy operates on a whisper network of fractured deals and exposed liabilities. Richard Vance did not keep his afternoon meetings a secret. He commanded a billion-dollar equity fund, and his rejections carried weight. When he tore up the term sheet on my patio, the fallout rippled through the venture capital ecosystem within hours. Analysts talked. Brokers gossiped. The syndicate holding the forged deed to my parents' house monitored these exact channels. Shadow lenders employ risk actuaries who track the viability of their debtors. They knew Tyler was banking his survival on the afternoon pitch. When the news of the catastrophic failure reached their servers, his status instantly downgraded from a high-risk investment to an active flight risk. Unregulated debt collection operates outside the boundaries of the civil litigation. The syndicate does not file motions in court or dispatch process servers with thick legal envelopes. They utilize geography and terror. Knowing Tyler was hiding in Hawaii, the organization did not waste time booking commercial flights for their mainland operatives. They activated a local contingency. They contracted a specialized crew operating out of the Maui underworld. 3 men of native descent, towering figures covered in intricate tribal ink. Individuals who earned their living executing extrajudicial extractions. They possessed an intimate knowledge of the island, navigating the blind spots local law enforcement ignored. Back at the squalid roadside motel, the stagnant heat of the afternoon baked the concrete walls. Jasmine returned to the room with clinical purpose. She found Tyler sitting on the edge of the stained mattress, staring blankly at the peeling wallpaper. His breathing was shallow, his shoulders hunched, the posture of a man waiting for the executioner. Jasmine did not offer comfort. She did not raise her voice. She pulled her designer suitcase from the corner and unzipped the main compartment. She moved methodically, folding her clothes, gathering her toiletries, and securing her travel documents. Tyler remained catatonic, consumed by his impending doom, failing to register that his marriage was ending right in front of him. Jasmine spotted his silver-encrypted laptop resting on the scratched wooden dresser. She picked it up, slipping the device into her carry-on bag, securing the raw data I required to sever her corporate liability. She zipped her luggage, opened the thin wooden door, and walked out into the fading tropical sunlight. She did not say goodbye. 10 minutes after Jasmine departed, a sharp vibration rattled the nightstand. Tyler flinched. The burner phone he used for his illicit transactions illuminated the dark corner of the room. He stared at the glowing screen, his pulse hammering against his ribs. He reached out with trembling fingers and picked up the device. It was a single text message from an untraceable alphanumeric sender. There was no text in the main body, only a high-resolution image file. Tyler tapped the screen, his breath catching in his throat as the picture rendered. The photograph displayed a familiar, haunting setting: the manicured green lawn, the red brick facade, the pristine white columns supporting a wide porch. It was Susan and David's sprawling colonial home in Connecticut, the house he had secretly pledged as collateral using a forged signature. Standing on the front porch of the suburban fortress were 3 unidentified men wearing dark jackets. Their faces were obscured by the evening shadows, but their intent was unmistakable. One of the men leaned casually against the front door, holding a heavy steel crowbar resting against his thigh. A second message arrived a moment later, featuring a few cold, calculated sentences. Bailout failed. Collateral seized tomorrow morning. Our island team has your location. Do not attempt to run. The phone slipped from his hand, clattering against the linoleum floor. The remaining oxygen evaporated from the room. The reality of his actions crashed down upon him, crushing the last fragments of his entrepreneurial delusion. He had signed away his parents' sanctuary. He had invited apex predators to their doorstep. Armed men were standing on their porch thousands of miles away, while a local crew of enforcers hunted him across the limited geography of the island. He was trapped in a vice, and the steel jaws were rapidly closing. His legs gave out. Tyler collapsed onto the filthy floor, his knees striking the cracked tiles with a dull thud. He let out a ragged, suffocating sob, curling his body inward. Susan, who had been sitting at the small dining table attempting to read an outdated magazine, dropped the glossy pages. She rushed forward, her maternal instincts overriding her exhaustion. David followed, his face pale with confusion. Tyler, what is happening? Susan demanded, dropping to her knees beside him. Her hands fluttered over his shoulders, trying to pull him upright. Talk to me. Where did Jasmine go? Why are you on the floor? Tyler could not maintain the fiction any longer. The polished billionaire founder was dead. Only a terrified, desperate child remained. He grabbed his father by the shirt collar, his eyes wide and bloodshot, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. They are going to kill me, Tyler choked out, his voice cracking. The deal fell through. The investor walked away. I owe money. Dad? A lot of money. $500,000. And the deadline is tomorrow. David staggered backward, his jaw dropping. $500,000. To a bank. No, Tyler screamed, slamming his fist against the floorboards. Not a bank. Dangerous men. They sent me a picture. They are standing on the porch of your house back home right now, and they have guys looking for me here. They are going to kill me, and they are going to take your house. Susan let out a piercing shriek, covering her mouth with her hands. The safe. Predictable reality she had known her entire life fractured. The country club dinners, the retirement portfolios, the arrogant pride she held for her son. All of it burned away in an instant, replaced by the chilling proximity of the criminal underworld. Tyler crawled across the floor, grabbing his mother around the ankles. He weaponized her fear, knowing she would do anything to protect him. "You have to call Vanessa," Tyler begged, his voice reduced to a pathetic whine. "She is the only one with liquid capital. She has the investment funds. Make her pay them. Tell her to wire the money right now. If she does not pay them, I am dead. You have to force her to do it." David stood frozen, grappling with the sheer magnitude of his son's failure. But Susan did not hesitate. The prospect of losing her golden child activated a toxic, unyielding entitlement. She did not view Tyler as a criminal who had endangered their lives. She viewed him as a victim in need of a rescue. And she viewed me as the designated financial safety net, obligated to absorb the cost of his mistakes. She reached into her purse and retrieved her smartphone. Her hands shook, but her expression hardened into a mask of desperate resolve. The petty family squabble over unpaid baggage fees and canceled flights had ceased to exist. The conflict had mutated into a raw, brutal negotiation for survival. Susan unlocked her screen and dialed my private number, preparing to deliver a ruthless ultimatum that would seal their collective fate. I sat at the polished marble kitchen island of the coastal villa, illuminated solely by the cold blue light of the encrypted laptop Jasmine had delivered. The decryption software ran a continuous, silent loop on the screen, systematically tearing through the digital firewalls my brother had erected to hide his insolvency. I was in the process of mapping the fraudulent shell companies, extracting the clean intellectual property belonging to my sister-in-law, when my personal smartphone vibrated against the stone countertop. The caller identification displayed my mother. I did not answer immediately. I took a measured sip of sparkling water, allowing the device to vibrate 4 times, asserting control over the rhythm of the engagement. I tapped the screen, engaged the secondary recording application to secure a pristine audio file, and accepted the connection. I placed the phone on the marble surface and activated the speaker. I did not offer a greeting. I waited for her to fill the silence. "Listen to me, Vanessa," Susan demanded. Her voice crackled through the small speaker. I analyzed her tone. A mother trapped in a decaying roadside motel, facing the imminent execution of her son by an underground syndicate, should sound broken. She should project remorse, panic, or profound regret for the sequence of events that led her family to the edge of an abyss. Susan projected none of those emotions. Her voice carried the sharp, toxic indignation of a wealthy suburban matriarch whose country club reservation had been misplaced. She did not beg for salvation. She expected compliance. "Tyler is in trouble," Susan continued, her words clipping with impatient authority. "Real trouble. The venture capital deal fell through this afternoon. He owes $500,000 to some very dangerous people. The deadline is tomorrow morning. If he does not pay, they are going to take our house in Connecticut, and they are going to hurt him." I heard the distinct sound of Tyler weeping in the background, a pathetic, rhythmic whimpering of a coward hiding behind his mother's skirt. David muttered something unintelligible, a background hum of useless complicity. I remained silent, letting the reality of their situation echo across the digital connection. "You need to liquidate your secondary investment portfolios," Susan ordered, dropping the pretense of a request and issuing a direct mandate. "I know you have the capital. I know your firm pays you a small fortune. You will wire $500,000 to Tyler's checking account by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. We can negotiate a repayment plan later. Right now, you have to save your brother." The sheer magnitude of her entitlement was a clinical marvel. They were stranded on an island, stripped of their credit, hunted by apex predators, and yet they still believed they occupied the highest position on the family hierarchy. They expected me to incinerate $500,000 of my own hard-earned wealth to sanitize a ledger destroyed by a fraudulent parasite. "I do not negotiate with terrorists," I replied, my voice steady, cold, and devoid of any familial warmth. And I do not finance dead assets. Susan drew a sharp, ragged breath. The refusal pierced her delusion, triggering the venomous defense mechanism she had honed over decades of enabling her son. She realized authority would not work. She pivoted to extortion. "You listen to me, you ungrateful little girl," Susan hissed, her tone dropping to a lethal register. "You think you hold all the cards because you have a fancy title and a luxury rental. You think you can just abandon your blood. If you do not initiate that wire transfer right now, your father and I are booking a flight back to the mainland. We will walk directly into the state police precinct, and we will file a formal criminal complaint against you." She paused, ensuring the threat carried maximum weight. "We will report you for elder financial abuse," Susan declared. I stopped typing on the laptop. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. "We will tell the authorities that you manipulated us," Susan continued, her voice gaining a sick, triumphant momentum. "We will swear under oath that you used your financial expertise to confuse us. We will claim you forced us to sign those irrevocable trust documents under extreme duress to steal our estate for yourself. You are a certified public accountant, Vanessa. You hold a fiduciary duty." The brilliance of her malice was undeniable. She did not understand the intricate mechanics of corporate trusts, but she understood my vulnerabilities. A senior corporate auditor operates entirely on a foundation of unblemished ethical credibility. The State Board of Accountancy does not ignore allegations of elder abuse. A formal complaint from my own parents would trigger an immediate, mandatory suspension of my CPA license, pending a rigorous federal investigation. My corporate firm would place me on indefinite unpaid leave to protect their reputation. My personal bank accounts would be frozen by regulatory agencies examining the allegations. My career, built over 14 years of flawless execution, would be subjected to a grueling public crucifixion. She was threatening to burn my entire existence to the ground to shield her son from his own consequences. This was the ultimate test of the bloodline. She was holding a knife to the throat of my professional identity. I did not feel fear. I did not feel a sudden spike of adrenaline. I felt a profound, chilling clarity. The final, microscopic thread of biological loyalty tying me to the woman on the other end of the line snapped. The mother I knew was dead. The entity speaking through the speaker was merely an opposing liability requiring neutralization. "You are threatening to commit perjury to extort a licensed federal auditor," I stated, ensuring the recording software captured the exact legal definition of her actions. "I am doing what I have to do to protect my family," Susan shrieked, her volume escalating into a frantic pitch. "You forced my hand. You will send that money tonight, Vanessa, or I swear to God, I will make sure you spend the rest of your life in a federal penitentiary. You will wire the funds right now, or I will—" She never finished the sentence. The auditory environment of the call fractured. A deafening, explosive crash erupted through the phone speaker, forcing me to flinch backward from the marble island. It was the distinct, unmistakable sound of a heavy wooden door being kicked off its hinges. The cheap pine frame splintered with a sharp crack that echoed like a gunshot. The pacing of the engagement shifted from a calculated verbal standoff to pure, uncontrolled physical chaos in a fraction of a second. The Shadow Syndicate had not waited for the Friday deadline. The local Hawaiian enforcers had located their target. The audio feed transmitted a symphony of terror. Heavy tactical boots stomped across the linoleum floor. David let out a startled, breathless shout before a dull thud indicated he had been shoved hard against a wall. Tyler's scream pierced the frequency. A high, raw shriek of a man staring directly into the eyes of a predator. "Grab him by the neck." A deep, unfamiliar voice barked over the commotion. Tyler sobbed, the sound muffled, likely due to a heavy hand gripping his throat. "Please," Tyler choked out, his voice wet with panic. "My sister is on the phone. She is sending the money. She is wiring it right now. I swear," Susan dropped her phone. The device clattered against the floor, but the microphone remained active, picking up the frantic scuffle. Susan screamed. A genuine, piercing cry of maternal horror, begging the intruders to let go of her son. The physical reality of the underground economy had intercepted her toxic ultimatum. Her threats of perjury and regulatory investigations meant nothing to men who collected debts with steel tools and brute force. Someone picked up the dropped smartphone. The rustling of fabric and heavy breathing filled the speaker. Hey? The deep voice growled into the receiver. You the sister with the cash? I looked at the glowing screen of my phone. I listened to Tyler weeping in the background, begging me to speak, begging me to save him from the consequences of the fraudulent empire he had built and the parents who had blindly funded it. I leaned closer to the device. A cold, detached smile altered the sharp lines of my face. You handle the consequences yourselves, I said softly. I reached out and pressed the red icon, severing the connection. The line went dead, plunging the coastal villa back into absolute, pristine silence. The trap was sprung. The predators were inside the wire. I turned my attention back to the encrypted laptop, leaving my brother to face the men who had come to collect their pound of flesh. The dead silence of the disconnected phone call in my coastal villa stood in stark contrast to the kinetic nightmare unfolding inside the roadside motel. I was not present in that decaying room to witness the physical extraction of his consequence. But the forensic evidence, the hospital records, and the ensuing police reports later painted a flawless, high-definition picture of his ultimate cowardice. When the cheap pine door splintered off its rusted hinges, it did not merely break. It exploded inward, sending a shower of sharp wooden shrapnel across the stained linoleum. The humid, stagnant air of the room was instantly displaced by the sheer physical presence of the intruders. 3 men stepped through the ruined frame. They were not mainland corporate fixers wearing tailored suits and carrying leather briefcases. They were local island enforcers. They possessed the towering, heavy builds of men who utilized brute force as a primary currency. Intricate tribal ink crept up their necks, disappearing beneath the collars of their dark, utilitarian clothing. They did not shout. They did not announce their affiliation. Shadow syndicates do not waste time reading Miranda rights or negotiating payment plans. They operate on a binary code of debt and pain. Tyler remained frozen near the edge of the sagging mattress, his smartphone resting dead on the floor where Susan had dropped it. The polished, charismatic tech founder he pretended to be had vanished entirely. Only a hollow, terrified shell remained. The lead enforcer closed the distance in 2 strides. He did not ask for identification. He reached out with a thick, calloused hand and grabbed Tyler by the collar of his ruined dress shirt. With a single, effortless upward motion, the enforcer lifted my brother off his feet. Tyler's toes scraped against the carpet as he choked, his airway constricted by the twisted fabric. The enforcer reached toward his tactical belt with his free hand and drew a heavy, matte black steel baton. The weapon extended with a sharp, mechanical click that echoed over the hum of the failing air conditioning unit. He lowered his gaze, locking his eyes onto Tyler's left kneecap. A shattered joint serves as a standard industry warning in the underground economy. It cripples the debtor without rendering them incapable of making phone calls to secure funds. The enforcer pulled his arm back, preparing to deliver the crippling strike. In that fraction of a second, facing imminent, agonizing physical trauma, the true genetic makeup of my brother surfaced. A man possessing a shred of integrity would have taken the blow. He would have shielded his elderly parents from the violence he had invited into their lives. Tyler, however, operated on a foundation of pure, unadulterated narcissism. His survival instinct recognized no boundaries of blood or loyalty. He required a human shield. David, acting on 30 years of conditioned reflex to protect his golden boy, stepped forward. He raised his trembling hands, stepping into the narrow gap between the bed and the attackers. Please, David pleaded, his voice thin and fragile. Leave him alone. We can get the cash. Just put him down. David positioned himself dangerously close to the kinetic zone. He intended to act as a verbal mediator. Tyler saw an opportunity for structural defense. As the enforcer initiated the downward swing of the steel baton, Tyler twisted his torso. He reached out with both hands, gripping the shoulders of his father. He did not gently push his father aside to avoid the strike. He executed a frantic, brutal shove. Tyler weaponized his own father, propelling David directly into the chest of the towering enforcer to disrupt the attack and create a momentary physical barrier. The impact threw the enforcer off balance, delaying the swing of the baton. But the kinetic force of the shove sent David hurtling backward. He lost his footing on the slick linoleum. His arms flailed, seeking purchase in the empty air. He crashed downward, his back striking the edge of the cheap glass coffee table, positioned near the center of the room. The fragile pane shattered instantly under his weight. Large, jagged shards of glass erupted upward. A sharp, sickening sound of tearing fabric and yielding flesh filled the cramped space. David rolled off the ruined table and hit the floor, clutching his side. A dark, arterial crimson began to pool rapidly onto the dirty carpet, soaking through his expensive resort shirt. Susan shrieked. The sound was not a mere cry of fear. It was a visceral, guttural wail of a woman watching her reality tear apart at the seams. She dropped to her knees beside her bleeding husband, her hands hovering over the deep lacerations. Paralyzed by the sudden, graphic violence, Tyler did not pause to check on the father he had just sacrificed. He did not look at the blood. The momentary tangle of bodies provided the exact tactical window he required. He snatched a heavy leather duffel bag from the foot of the bed, ducked beneath the arm of the second enforcer, and bolted through the shattered doorway. He burst into the humid Hawaiian night, his lungs burning as he gasped for oxygen. The neon sign of the motel buzzed overhead, casting a sickly pink glow across the asphalt. Tyler sprinted toward the parking lot, his eyes fixed on the beige rental car he had stolen earlier. He believed his betrayal had purchased his freedom. He believed he had outsmarted the executioners. He reached the edge of the concrete walkway and stopped dead. The perimeter was sealed. Two heavy, dark SUVs were parked horizontally across the single exit of the motel parking lot, blocking any vehicular escape. 4 more men leaned casually against the hoods of the trucks, their arms crossed, watching the pathetic target sprint into their net. Escape was geographically impossible. The Shadow Syndicate did not leave loose ends. Behind him, the heavy footsteps of the lead enforcer crunched on the gravel walkway. Tyler spun around. The towering man stepped out of the motel room, stepping over the splintered wood. Holding the steel baton at his side, he walked with a slow, deliberate cadence, the posture of a predator who knows the prey has run out of space. Tyler backed away. His designer shoes slipped on a patch of oil-slicked asphalt. He retreated until his spine hit the rough brick wall of the motel exterior. There was nowhere left to run. The man who had confidently slapped my face in front of hundreds of passengers at a bustling international airport now dissolved into a puddle of absolute cowardice. His knees buckled. Tyler slid down the brick wall. Hitting the abrasive pavement, he dropped to his knees, pressing his hands together in a gesture of desperate supplication. Tears streamed down his face, mixing with the sweat and dirt. Snot ran from his nose. His chest heaved with ragged, pathetic sobs. "Please," Tyler begged, his voice cracking, echoing across the empty parking lot. "Please do not kill me." The investor backed out. "My sister locked me out. I have assets. I can get you the capital. Just give me 48 hours. I swear on my life." The lead enforcer stopped 3 feet away. He looked down at the weeping man with an expression of profound, clinical disgust. Tyler realized his words held zero currency. He needed to offer tangible value. He remembered the contents of his leather duffel bag. While he had handed one counterfeit watch to my security guard, he always traveled with a backup prop to maintain his billionaire illusion. He frantically unzipped the side compartment of the bag. His trembling fingers retrieved a dark velvet box. He flipped it open, revealing a gleaming, heavy timepiece. To an untrained eye in the neon light, it projected the aura of a $20,000 Swiss masterpiece. "Take this," Tyler sobbed, holding the open box up toward the enforcer with shaking hands. "It is a genuine luxury piece. It covers the interest. Take it. Let me walk away." The enforcer did not reach out to inspect the dial. He did not calculate the resale value. He simply swung his left hand, slapping the velvet box out of Tyler's grip. The heavy timepiece flew through the air and clattered onto the rough asphalt, landing face up. The enforcer raised his right leg. He brought his heavy, steel-toed tactical boot down directly onto the center of the watch face. The impact crushed the synthetic crystal glass into fine powder. The internal gears ground into the pavement, flattening the cheap aluminum casing until the prop resembled a mangled coin. The enforcer shifted his weight, grinding the heel of his boot into the destroyed metal. He leaned forward, casting a dark shadow over my kneeling brother. "Fake." The enforcer spat, his voice a low, unforgiving growl. "Just like your collateral." The word struck Tyler with the force of a kinetic round. The Syndicate knew. They knew the deed to the Connecticut house was a forgery. They knew the asset he had pledged did not belong to him. The final, desperate shield he had constructed to delay his execution was gone. Back at the shattered doorway of the motel room, Susan and David witnessed the entire exchange. David leaned heavily against the doorframe, clutching his bleeding side. His face drained of color. Susan supported his weight, her eyes wide and unblinking. The veil of suburban denial that had protected their fragile worldview for 3 decades finally burned away, leaving nothing but cold, undeniable truth. They did not see a misunderstood visionary entrepreneur kneeling on the pavement. They saw a hollow, cowardly parasite. They saw a monster who had quietly signed away their home to dangerous criminals, and who had literally thrown his own father into a wall of violence just to buy himself a few seconds of running time. The poetic justice was absolute and merciless. They had spent their entire lives demanding that I sacrifice my boundaries, my finances, and my dignity to protect the golden child. Now, standing bleeding in the doorway of a squalid motel, watching that same child beg for his life after sacrificing them to a shadow syndicate, they understood the fatal cost of their favoritism. The idol they worshipped had led them directly to the slaughterhouse. The crushed remains of the counterfeit watch lay scattered across the rough asphalt, gleaming faintly under the harsh neon glow of the motel sign. Tyler stared at the pulverized metal, his brain struggling to process the total collapse of his final defensive barrier. The towering local enforcer did not step back. He did not offer a moment for my brother to compose himself. The man reached beneath the hem of his dark tactical jacket. The movement was fluid, practiced, and terrifyingly casual. He extracted a matte black semi-automatic pistol. He racked the slide, the sharp metallic clack cutting through the low hum of the failing air conditioning units, and pressed the cold steel barrel directly against the center of Tyler's forehead. Tyler stopped crying. The sheer, overwhelming proximity of death paralyzed his tear ducts. He felt the rigid, unforgiving edge of the muzzle digging into his skin. The humid tropical air suddenly felt freezing. Behind him, standing in the splintered doorway of the decaying motel room, David slumped heavily against the doorframe, his hands slick with his own arterial blood. Susan let out a strangled, breathless gasp, her hands flying to her mouth. She was entirely unable to look away from the weapon pressed against her son. They were standing on the precipice, forced to witness the inevitable, violent conclusion of the arrogance and entitlement they had cultivated for decades. The lead enforcer looked down the barrel of the weapon. "You pledged a suburban property in Connecticut 6 months ago," the enforcer stated, his voice a low, mechanical drone devoid of any human empathy. "Our compliance team ran the title this afternoon. The deed has a lock on it. You gave us garbage paper. You stole $500,000 from men who do not forgive bad debts. You have 10 seconds to explain why I should not paint this parking lot with your brains. Tyler felt a warm stream of urine run down his leg, soaking into the fabric of his ruined designer trousers. The survival instinct of a cornered parasite overrides all human dignity. He raised his trembling hands, palms facing outward, hyper-focused on keeping his movements slow and predictable to avoid triggering the sear of the pistol. "The title is clear," Tyler stammered, his voice vibrating with raw, unfiltered panic. "The lock is a mistake. A bureaucratic error. I swear on my life. I have the physical documents right here in my bag. I have a blank deed transfer form. I can sign it over to your holding company right now. Immediate transfer of ownership. No courts, no foreclosure delays. You get a $2 million estate free and clear to cover a $500,000 debt. You quadruple your return on investment tonight. Just let me sign it." The enforcer kept that gun pressed firmly against Tyler's skull. He utilized his free hand to gesture toward the heavy leather duffel bag resting on the pavement. "Open it." Slowly, Tyler scrambled, his fingers slipping frantically on the brass zippers. He tore open the side compartment and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He extracted a stack of crisp legal documents. It was a pre-drafted quitclaim deed, a document he had prepared weeks in advance, intending to use it as a last resort bargaining chip to buy himself a few more months of breathing room. He smoothed the crumpled papers against the abrasive asphalt, his hands shaking so violently the pages rattled. The enforcer evaluated the desperate man kneeling at his feet. A signature on a physical document provided a tangible asset the syndicate could leverage, even if the primary lien faced temporary legal friction. The enforcer withdrew a heavy tactical pen from his chest pocket and tossed it onto the ground. "Sign it," the enforcer commanded. Tyler grabbed the pen. He did not hesitate. He did not turn around to look at his bleeding father or his horrified mother. He did not pause to consider the fact that he was officially, permanently rendering them homeless, signing away the very roof over their heads to a criminal enterprise. He signed his name on the designated lines, pressing so hard the black ink bled through the thick stock paper. He dated the document. He authorized the immediate transfer of the Fairfield Colonial Estate to an anonymous limited liability company controlled by the Shadow Syndicate. He dropped the pen, letting out a ragged, shuddering exhale of relief. He believed he had executed a masterstroke of survival. He believed he had successfully sacrificed his family to purchase his own oxygen. Tyler possessed a fatal flaw that permeated every single aspect of his existence. He fundamentally underestimated my capacity for preemptive warfare. Sitting in the pristine quiet of my coastal villa, running the decryption software on his laptop, I already knew the intricate details of the forged loan. My forensic audit of his financial footprint had not begun this morning. It began 3 months ago, during a routine review of my parents' tax liabilities earlier that spring. My proprietary algorithms detected a subtle anomaly. A shadow inquiry had been placed against the deed of their Connecticut home. I traced the digital signature through a labyrinth of shell companies, tracking it straight back to a predatory lending syndicate. Tyler had forged their names, leveraging their sanctuary to secure $500,000 in hard money. I did not confront him. Confrontation alerts the parasite. I chose eradication. I immediately booked a flight to Connecticut. I sat my parents down in their formal dining room. I did not mention Tyler or his impending default. Instead, I deployed a psychological strategy they could not resist. I warned them about the aggressive nature of federal estate taxes and the predatory costs of long-term elder care. I presented them with a stack of complex legal documents drafted by the senior partners at my corporate auditing firm. I advised them to protect their legacy. I instructed them to transfer the total ownership of their property into an irrevocable corporate trust. I explained that the trust would shield the house from medical bankruptcies and tax audits. They signed the paperwork eagerly, praising my financial acumen. entirely unaware they were sealing themselves inside an impenetrable legal vault designed by their own daughter. The moment their signatures dried, the deed was transferred to a corporate entity managed by a board of directors. Susan and David became mere tenants in a house they used to own. Tyler became a man holding a match in a vacuum. An irrevocable corporate trust is a fortress of modern jurisprudence. It cannot be altered, borrowed against, or seized by external creditors without a federal court order. The forged lien Tyler had placed on the property 6 months prior was instantly subordinated and rendered legally void by the ironclad structure of the trust. Kneeling on the dark asphalt in Maui, Tyler held the signed quitclaim deed up toward the enforcer, a pathetic, hopeful smile forming on his dirt-streaked face. "It is yours," Tyler whispered, his breathing erratic. "The house is yours. We are clear." The lead enforcer snatched the paperwork from his trembling hand. He stepped back, keeping the pistol aimed directly at Tyler's chest. He pulled a specialized encrypted smartphone from his vest pocket. He activated the camera, snapped a high-resolution photograph of the signed document, and transmitted it directly to the Syndicate legal compliance team operating on the mainland. "Stand up," the enforcer ordered. Tyler scrambled to his feet, his knees shaking so severely he nearly collapsed again. He brushed the gravel off his torn trousers. He looked toward the motel room, finally making eye contact with his parents. Susan stared at him with an expression of hollow devastation. He had just sold their home to save himself, executing the ultimate betrayal right in front of their eyes. Tyler quickly looked away, unable to bear the weight of her gaze. He focused on the enforcer, waiting for the dismissal, waiting for permission to walk away into the night. The encrypted smartphone buzzed in the enforcer's hand. The response from the mainland analysts was instantaneous. The Syndicate employed former corporate lawyers who understood the architecture of asset protection better than most federal judges. They ran the fresh signature against the current county property registry. They hit the concrete wall I had erected 3 months prior. The enforcer read the brief text message displayed on his screen. His expression remained static. He slowly lowered the phone, slipping it back into his tactical vest. He looked at Tyler. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, drowning out the sound of the nearby ocean. Tyler shifted his weight, a cold spike of dread piercing his temporary relief. "Is it good?" Tyler asked, his voice cracking into a high pitch. "We are good." "Right." The enforcer raised the signed deed transfer. He gripped the edges of the heavy legal paper. With a swift, fluid motion, he tore the document in half. He placed the halves together and tore them again, letting the shredded pieces flutter down onto the oil-stained asphalt. "You do not own this property," the enforcer stated, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "The deed belongs to a corporate trust. Your signature on this paper has zero legal authority. You just tried to pay a $500,000 syndicate debt with a forged document while staring down the barrel of a loaded gun." Tyler's heart stopped. The world around him tilted. The brilliant survival strategy he thought he had executed was nothing more than a fatal miscalculation. I had stripped him of his collateral months before he even knew he needed it. The shield he tried to hide behind had been turned to ash. "You insulted my employers," the enforcer continued, raising the semi-automatic pistol until the iron sights aligned perfectly with the center of Tyler's chest. "You have no money. You have no assets. You have exhausted your utility." Tyler opened his mouth to scream, to beg for another chance, to offer a lie he had not yet invented. But the financial ledger was permanently closed. The debt required immediate physical settlement. The enforcer tightened his finger on the trigger, preparing to execute the final transaction. The heavy steel of the semi-automatic pistol pressed into the skin of my brother's forehead. The tropical humidity clung to his ruined suit, but his veins ran ice cold. He squeezed his eyes shut, his jaw trembling uncontrollably, bracing for the kinetic impact that would end his chaotic existence. The enforcer maintained a rigid, professional stance. His finger applied steady, incremental pressure to the curved metal of the trigger. The mechanical sear inside the weapon engaged, mere millimeters away from releasing the firing pin. In that fraction of a second, the auditory environment of the parking lot fractured. It did not begin with a vocal command. It began with a deafening, mechanical roar that tore through the quiet Hawaiian night. A blinding wall of high-intensity halogen light flooded the motel courtyard, washing out the cheap pink neon of the vacancy sign. The sudden illumination cast long, sharp shadows across the oil-stained asphalt. The heavy, rhythmic thud of armored tires grinding against the pavement shook the ground beneath Tyler's knees. Two matte black Lenco Bearcat tactical vehicles breached the front and rear exits of the parking lot simultaneously, sealing the perimeter with impenetrable walls of ballistic steel. The enforcer froze. His tactical training overrode his mandate to collect the debt. A seasoned operative recognizes the distinct difference between a routine local police patrol and a coordinated federal raid. He did not pull the trigger. He snapped his head toward the blinding lights, his eyes narrowing as he calculated the threat matrix. Federal agents. Drop the weapon. Step away from the target. The command boomed through a high-grade acoustic hailing device, a sound wave so dense it vibrated the loose teeth in Tyler's jaw. The voice offered zero room for negotiation. The side doors of the armored transport slid open. Dozens of operators poured into the courtyard, moving with fluid, synchronized precision. They wore olive-drab tactical gear, heavy ceramic plate carriers, and Kevlar helmets. The bold yellow lettering across their chests and backs identified their jurisdiction: the Federal Bureau of Investigation. A dozen crimson laser sights cut through the humid air, converging directly on the chest and face of the lead enforcer. The red dots danced across his dark jacket, silent promises of immediate lethal force if he twitched a muscle in the wrong direction. The enforcer was a predator in the underground economy, but he was not suicidal. He understood the hierarchy of power. He slowly lowered the semi-automatic pistol, extending his arm outward to demonstrate compliance. He opened his calloused hand, allowing the weapon to drop to the asphalt with a sharp clatter. He interlaced his fingers behind his head and dropped to his knees, joining Tyler on the abrasive pavement. The tactical operators swarmed the courtyard, the air filled with the sharp, metallic ratcheting of industrial zip ties and heavy steel handcuffs. The three Syndicate enforcers were subjugated, disarmed, and secured in less than 20 seconds. The lethal threat of the shadow banking network evaporated under the crushing weight of federal authority. Miles away from the chaotic scene, I sat in the serene quiet of my coastal villa. I did not need to be present to witness the tactical execution. My encrypted laptop rested on the marble kitchen island, displaying the active radio frequencies of the regional federal dispatch. I listened to the clipped, professional confirmations of the breach team securing the suspects. Tyler believed he was running from a broken lease and a smashed windshield. He failed to comprehend the scope of the machinery I had mobilized against him. The Federal Bureau of Investigation does not deploy armored vehicles and heavily armed tactical teams to settle a domestic dispute over a ruined family vacation. They do not care about a shattered rental car window. They care about organized financial syndicates. From the moment Tyler slapped my face at the airport, I had been building a pristine prosecutorial dossier. When I audited his digital footprint, I did not stop at his empty business ledgers. I mapped the decentralized wallets and routing numbers associated with the shadow lenders hunting him. I documented the interstate extortion when he demanded $50,000 via a telecommunications network. I provided the forged quitclaim deed, establishing a clear paper trail of federal bank fraud. I packaged the extortion audio, the vandalism video, the fraudulent financial metrics, and the syndicate identifiers into a single, undeniable intelligence packet. I submitted it directly to the White-Collar Crime and Organized Crime Joint Task Force. I handed the federal government the exact coordinates of a violent loan sharking ring and the confessed fraudster who lured them across state lines. I served them a career-making bust on a silver platter. The response was guaranteed to be overwhelming, surgical, and permanent. Back in the motel parking lot, the ringing in Tyler's ears began to subside. He opened his eyes, blinking against the harsh glare of the halogen floodlights. He saw the enforcer who had nearly ended his life lying face down on the concrete, his hands bound behind his back. A wave of euphoric, misplaced relief washed over my brother. The delusion that had guided his entire life reignited. He believed the universe had intervened to save him. He believed he was the victim of a kidnapping attempt, and these federal agents were his personal rescue squad. He let out a ragged gasp, attempting to stand up. He wiped the dirt and tears from his face, preparing to deliver a tragic narrative to the closest authority figure. "Thank God you are here," Tyler choked out, his voice trembling as he reached a hand out toward a passing agent. "These men tried to kill me. They tracked me down. I need medical attention. I need to call my lawyer." The agent did not offer a thermal blanket or a sympathetic ear. He did not slow his stride. He stepped into Tyler's personal space, grabbed him by the shoulder of his torn suit jacket, and spun him around with bone-jarring force. Tyler let out a sharp cry of confusion as the agent drove him forward. His chest slammed against the warm metal hood of a nearby police cruiser. The impact knocked the remaining breath from his lungs. An agent grabbed his wrists, twisting them sharply behind his back. The cold, heavy bite of double-locked steel handcuffs clamped down on his skin. "Wait!" Tyler sputtered, struggling against the unyielding grip. "You are making a mistake. I am the victim." They had a gun to my head. "You are Tyler Brooks," the senior agent stated, his voice a flat, bureaucratic monotone that sliced through the frantic protests. Tyler nodded his head frantically against the hood of the car. Yes, that is me." The agent stepped back, reading from a laminated card retrieved from his tactical vest. "Tyler Brooks, you are under arrest pursuant to a sealed federal indictment. You are charged with multiple counts of wire fraud, interstate extortion, and money laundering. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The words struck Tyler with far more kinetic force than the enforcer baton ever could. Wire fraud, extortion, money laundering. These were not municipal citations or civil lawsuits. These were terminal federal charges carrying mandatory minimum sentences that measured in decades. The trap had not merely saved him from the Syndicate, it had swallowed him whole. Standing in the shattered frame of the motel room door, Susan and David watched the scene unfold in horrified paralysis. David clutched his bleeding side, his breathing shallow and rapid. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the despair etched into their aging faces. For 30 years, they had operated under the assumption that their socioeconomic status and their blind loyalty could shield their son from any consequence. They had bailed him out of academic failures, covered his stolen funds, and blamed the world for his shortcomings. They believed they held the power to manipulate reality to favor their golden child. Watching two federal agents drag Tyler away from the cruiser, his head bowed and his hands shackled in heavy steel, the architecture of their denial collapsed into dust. There was no checkbook large enough to bribe a federal task force. There was no country club connection that could erase a grand jury indictment. The United States government had laid claim to their son, and the government does not negotiate with enablers. Tyler was loaded into the back of a secure transport vehicle. He twisted his neck, looking back through the reinforced steel mesh of the window. He locked eyes with his parents one final time. He did not look like a visionary founder. He looked like a ruined, broken fraud, departing for a concrete cell. The transport vehicle shifted into gear, rolling out of the illuminated parking lot, taking my brother away to face a justice system devoid of maternal sympathy. The physical confrontation had ended, but the true reckoning, the meticulous dismantling of their remaining arrogance in a federal courtroom, was just beginning. 6 months is a profound duration of time within the federal penal system. The initial shock of incarceration fades, replaced by the crushing, repetitive reality of concrete, steel, and scheduled movements. The illusion of a quick legal fix evaporates, leaving only the grim anticipation of a final verdict. The United States District Court in Los Angeles is an architectural environment designed specifically to command submission. The towering mahogany paneled walls, the soaring ceilings, and the heavy silence of the room strip away all remnants of suburban privilege and corporate pretense. I sat in the second row of the gallery, wearing a tailored charcoal suit, my posture rigid and calculated. I watched the heavy oak doors near the holding cells swing open. 2 armed federal marshals escorted my brother into the courtroom. Tyler did not resemble the arrogant, self-proclaimed tech founder who had commanded the airport terminal half a year prior. He wore a standard-issue khaki detention uniform. Heavy steel chains linked his wrists to a thick leather belt around his waist, creating a hollow, rhythmic clatter with every abbreviated step he took. His skin held a sickly, pale gray hue, deprived of the California sun. His hair was unkempt. His shoulders slumped forward under the invisible weight of his impending ruin. The prosecution did not require a lengthy, drawn-out trial. The digital dossier I had constructed and submitted functioned as a legal guillotine. The prosecuting attorney stood at the podium, presenting the timeline with surgical precision. The courtroom speakers broadcast the pristine audio recording of Tyler demanding $50,000 from me under the threat of destroying my professional auditing license. The high-definition video of his feral vandalism, smashing the windshield of my rented sports car, played on the large monitors facing the jury box. The evidence was empirical, documented, and undeniable. His own voice, laced with toxic entitlement and desperate extortion, echoed off the mahogany walls, sealing his fate in real time. The federal judge, a stern figure known for delivering merciless sentences in white-collar criminal cases, did not offer a lecture on wasted potential or the tragedy of family conflict. He viewed Tyler through a lens of pure legal liability. The judge read the mandatory sentencing guidelines for the compiled charges: wire fraud, interstate extortion, money laundering. The gavel struck the sounding block. The judge sentenced Tyler to 144 months in a federal penitentiary. 12 years. The federal system does not offer parole. Tyler would spend the remainder of his youth and the entirety of his prime adult years locked inside a cage, surrounded by men who did not care about his fake Rolex or his fabricated venture capital pitches. Tyler collapsed into his wooden chair, the chains rattling loudly as his head dropped toward the defense table. The court adjourned. The gallery began to clear. I remained seated, organizing my notes, preparing to exit. Tyler Court appointed public defender, an exhausted lawyer carrying a thick, disorganized stack of manila folders, unlatched the swinging wooden gate and approached the gallery railing. He stopped a few feet away from me. He wiped a layer of sweat from his forehead, looking at my tailored suit and the expensive leather briefcase resting next to me. "Ms. Brooks," the lawyer began, his tone carrying the weary resignation of a man who dealt with ruined lives every single day. "I know the relationship here is fractured, but your brother is facing immediate transfer to the federal holding facility. His accounts are frozen. He possesses 0 commissary funds." I looked at the lawyer, maintaining a neutral, unreadable expression. "There is a mandatory administrative court surcharge." The public defender continued, checking a printed invoice in his hand. "It covers the filing of his appeals paperwork and the initial processing fees for the Victim Restitution Fund. The clerk office requires payment before the close of business today. Tyler is entirely destitute. The total fee is exactly $1,200. I was hoping, given your financial standing, you might be willing to walk down to the clerk window and swipe your card to cover his processing." I shifted my gaze past the weary lawyer. Tyler had turned around in his chair. He was looking at me through the wooden slats of the barrier. His eyes were hollow, rimmed with red, silently begging me to perform one final act of grace, to save him from the ultimate humiliation of entering the federal prison system as an indigent inmate. The symmetry of the moment was a masterpiece of poetic justice. $1,200. The exact amount he had demanded I pay for his 6 oversized suitcases at the airport departure gate Seconds before he struck my face, I stood up from the wooden bench. I smoothed the lapel of my charcoal blazer. I reached down and lifted my Hermes handbag, adjusting the premium leather strap comfortably over my shoulder. I looked directly into my brother's eyes, ensuring he could read the cold, permanent finality in my gaze. "Use your own corporate card, Tyler," I said softly, delivering the exact same rejection I had issued at the terminal. I turned my back on him. I did not listen to his reaction. I walked down the center aisle, pushed through the heavy oak doors, and stepped out into the bright, unfiltered sunlight of the Los Angeles afternoon. Jasmine did not attend the sentencing hearing. She was hundreds of miles away, sitting in a glass-walled conference room, approving the launch of a new product line for her lifestyle brand. The forensic firewall I had constructed around her intellectual property functioned flawlessly. The digital extraction separated her legitimate assets from his fraudulent shell companies before the federal freeze took effect. Her divorce decree was expedited and finalized months ago. She severed the infected limb, reclaimed her maiden name, and rebuilt her enterprise. We never spoke again. The pragmatic pact was fulfilled. Susan and David sat in the very last row of the courtroom gallery during the sentencing. I did not acknowledge them on my way out. They did not resemble the affluent country club elite they had pretended to be their entire lives. They wore cheap, off-the-rack clothing. They looked frail, aged, and hollowed out by the sheer velocity of their downfall. The Shadow Syndicate never seized their colonial estate in Connecticut. The irrevocable corporate trust held firm, repelling the criminal lien exactly as designed. However, the legitimate commercial banking sector demonstrated no such mercy. Over the past decade, blinded by their unwavering faith in their visionary son, Susan and David had quietly co-signed multiple traditional business loans and personal lines of credit to fund his early ventures. When the federal indictment dropped and the government seized his remaining phantom assets, the commercial banks immediately called in the debts. The guarantors were held legally liable for the fallout. Their pristine retirement accounts were drained. Their stock portfolios were liquidated. The banks seized their vehicles and garnished their remaining pensions, unable to afford the staggering property taxes and maintenance costs of the Connecticut fortress. The trust administrators were forced to liquidate the home. Susan and David lost everything. They were forced to relocate to a cramped, subsidized public housing unit on the grim, industrial outskirts of the city. They spend their days sitting on a faded thrift store sofa, holding a prepaid cellular phone, dialing my private number. They leave desperate voicemails, pleading for a bridge loan, begging for a fraction of the wealth they once demanded I sacrifice for their golden child. The phone calls never connect. The digital block I initiated is permanent. The boundary is sealed in concrete. The transition from the sterile, suffocating air of the federal courthouse to the vibrant, untethered energy of the Pacific Ocean is a sensory revelation. I am lounging on the polished teak deck of a private chartered yacht, cutting through the deep, azure waters off the coast of Maui. The warm tropical sun heats my skin, and the steady trade winds carry the sharp, clean scent of sea salt. The twin engines hum with a deep, reliable power, pushing the vessel toward the horizon. A uniformed staff member approaches quietly, placing a chilled Mai Tai in a heavy crystal glass on the table beside my lounge chair. The condensation drips down the side of the glass, catching the sunlight. I look down at the wooden deck. There are no 6 oversized, bloated suitcases cluttering the pristine space. There is no heavy baggage dragging me down, demanding my capital, or insisting I shrink my own existence to accommodate their fragile egos. There is only a single, elegant weekender bag resting quietly near my chair. The heavy, suffocating weight of toxic family obligation has been permanently jettisoned. The ledgers are balanced. The liabilities have been neutralized and locked behind steel doors. I pick up the crystal glass, taking a slow sip of the sweet, potent cocktail, savoring the crisp taste of pure, unadulterated freedom. The ocean wind sweeping across the bow of the yacht carries away the last lingering shadows of my past. I sit back against the leather cushions, watching the island of Maui shrink into a distant green speck on the horizon. The profound peace I feel right now was not gifted to me. It was engineered. It was carefully extracted from the ruins of a toxic bloodline. Looking back at the wreckage my brother and my parents built for themselves, the arithmetic of survival becomes flawlessly clear. The first lesson I pulled from this ordeal is recognizing the true cost of unconditional loyalty. Society conditions us to believe that family is an unbreakable contract, a ledger where debts of disrespect and exploitation must be endlessly forgiven. My parents weaponized that belief, expecting me to finance the delusions of their golden child at the expense of my own future. But shared genetics do not entitle anyone to your sanctuary. When relatives view your hard-earned success merely as their personal emergency fund, cutting them off is not an act of cruelty. It is the fundamental mathematics of self-preservation. The second lesson lies in the architecture of leverage. Tyler believed that throwing a tantrum at an airport, projecting a fake billionaire persona, or smashing a windshield demonstrated power. He relied on noise, intimidation, and brute force. True power is silent and structural. It is anticipating the threat months before it arrives and building a concrete bunker around your assets. The irrevocable trust was drafted and signed long before he ever picked up a pen to forge that deed. You do not win a war by screaming at the enemy. You win by quietly rewriting the rules of the battlefield so their weapons become entirely useless upon impact. Finally, the third lesson is the absolute superiority of cold detachment. When my mother called to extort me, threatening to destroy the professional license I spent 14 years earning, the primal human instinct would have been to rage, to argue, or to beg for mercy. Anger is a tactical flaw. It exposes your pressure points and hands your opponent a map to your vulnerabilities. I chose clinical silence. I gathered the telemetry, audited the risks, and allowed their own escalating greed to march them directly into an inescapable federal snare. A calm, calculating mind will always outmaneuver a desperate, chaotic ego. The ledgers are permanently closed. The liabilities have been neutralized by the very justice system they thought they could manipulate. I am Vanessa. I evaluate risk. I protect my capital. And I do not finance my own destruction. Thank you for listening to my case file here on Silent Vengeance Stories. If you have ever had to execute a hard reset on a toxic family dynamic to protect your peace and your empire, drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.